Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the surface of the world, past the soil, past the roots, down where light forgets your name. We're going to wander through the entire story of Hades, the shadowy god who somehow managed to be both terrifying and underappreciated at the same time. You're about to find yourself floating through ancient myth, in a place that smells like old stone, candle smoke, and just a little bit of doom. You probably won't survive this, but that's fine. Nobody does down here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're listening. It's always fun to know who's tuning in from the edges of night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting in darkness, but it's not empty. It's pregnant with possibility. The ancient Greeks imagined the universe as a great layered thing. Up top, Olympus, home of the thunder-hurling party crowd. In the middle, the mortal realm, where you and I trudge through our taxes and tragedies. And far below it all, deeper than you could dig with 10 lifetimes of shovels, lies the underworld. That's where we begin. At first, there was chaos. Not like your messy bedroom, but a cosmic void where everything and nothing existed at once. From that weird soup came Gaia, the earth, Tartarus, a kind of cosmic basement, and Eros, the spark that makes things mix and multiply. Eventually came the Titans, huge, moody beings who probably invented family drama. When the Titan Cronus overthrew his own father Uranus, the universe basically said, "Cool, I guess patricide is a tradition now." But Cronus didn't learn. He swallowed his children whole, fearing they'd overthrow him too. That's where Rhea, his wife, stepped in with one of history's first parenting hacks. She swapped baby Zeus for a rock. Cronus ate the stone, burped contentedly, and never noticed. Eventually Zeus grew up, staged a coup, and forced his dad to vomit up his siblings like a divine piñata. Poseidon, Hera, Hestia, Demeter, and of course Hades. Historians still argue whether Hades' name originally meant the unseen one or he who all must see eventually. Either way, it's not a nickname you'd put on a dating profile. Hades didn't ask to be Lord of the Dead when the War of the Titans ended. The brothers divided creation like an inheritance nobody really wanted. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon took the sea, and Hades drew the underworld. Poor guy. He didn't even get to live near sunlight again. Picture him standing there in his fresh, obsidian armor, the shadows clinging to him like old friends. He's not evil, not exactly. In Greek thought, death wasn't wicked, it was inevitable. Someone had to manage the logistics. And Hades, being practical, took the job. He built himself a kingdom beneath the roots of mountains, sealed with river borders and guarded by monsters. You'll meet them soon enough. A mainstream historical fact. The idea of an underworld wasn't unique to Greece. Nearly every ancient culture had one. Sumerians had Kur, Egyptians had Duat, and even the early Norse had Hell. Death has always needed a postal address. But the Greeks gave their afterlife a twist. It wasn't purely punishment. Most souls just wandered, mildly confused, for eternity. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient Greeks buried their dead with tiny gold tablets called totempass, like passport slips, engraved with directions for navigating Hades' realm. Imagine trying to cross eternity armed only with a receipt-sized cheat sheet. At the fork, take the left river unless Cerberus looks hungry. Hades' first days as ruler must have been awkward. Zeus was out throwing lightning parades, Poseidon was showing off waves the size of cities, and Hades, well, he was learning how to stop souls from leaking out of cracks in the floor. He created the 5 rivers to mark the borders of his world. Styx for oaths, Acheron for sorrow, Lethe for forgetfulness, Phlegethon for fire, and Cocytus for lamentation. Together, they made a kind of emotional plumbing system for eternity. You feel the air growing denser as you sink deeper. Every exhale feels like it takes a century to leave your lungs. Somewhere far below, you sense the soft rumble of movement, millions of footsteps of shades, each one whispering, "I was once alive." You step onto ancient stone, and the underworld stretches before you like an infinite cathedral of dusk. Hades himself appears at the center, tall, still, expression unreadable. His eyes seem to remember every life ever lived. He's flanked by Nyx's shadows and crowned with jet black metal that glints like spilled ink. Some myths say he rarely smiled, but when he did, flowers wilted. You suspect that's an exaggeration, probably spread by mortals who needed an excuse for their bad gardening. Even in the gloom, Hades commands respect. The dead bow as he passes. Spirits of kings, beggars, and poets all stand equal before him. Maybe that's why he's never as angry as Zeus or as vain as Aphrodite. Everyone's equal in his house eventually. Still, historians debate whether the Greeks truly feared Hades himself, or the concept of being remembered by him. People avoided saying his name outright, referring to him instead as Platon, meaning the wealthy one. After all, he owned all the earth's riches, metals, gems, and everything buried in the ground. Kind of ironic that the god of death was also the god of wealth. Then again, taxes and funerals are both inevitable. As you wander, a soft laugh echoes from somewhere behind a pillar, a voice both comforting and chilling. Maybe the god himself is amused that mortals still talk about him at bedtime, long after his temples turn to dust. You can almost hear him whisper, "Even stories die eventually." But not yet. Tonight, you'll keep walking. You'll see how Hades builds his world from shadow, how it runs with impossible order, and how love, yes, love, finds its way even in a kingdom without sunlight. You take one more step, feeling the chill of the underworld rise to your ankles like fog. The path ahead shimmers faintly, leading deeper into myth. Somewhere in the dark, a ferryman waits, and the first river begins to whisper your name. You feel that gentle tug, like gravity, but more personal, and the world around you slides deeper still. The air grows heavier, touched with that mineral scent of stone and something ancient that doesn't have a word anymore. Somewhere the gods gather. Tonight, you're standing at the dawn of decision, when three brothers divided the cosmos like poker winnings. The war against the Titans has ended. You can still taste the dust of fallen mountains, the ozone of Zeus's lightning seared into the air. The Olympians have won, but victory comes with paperwork. Someone has to manage creation now. The universe isn't just going to govern itself. So the brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, meet on neutral ground to sort out who gets what. No one writes minutes for this meeting, but you can imagine it. Zeus leans back, thunderbolts twirling like pens between his fingers. Poseidon smells faintly of salt and ego, already humming with sea spray and self-satisfaction. And Hades, quiet, composed, a bit like that one co-worker who reads the fine print while everyone else is celebrating, stands apart. They draw lots, because apparently that's how gods handle cosmic inheritance. Zeus pulls the sky, Poseidon claims the sea. Hades unrolls his parchment and finds the short straw, the underworld, a literal basement apartment of eternity. You can almost hear Zeus mutter, "Better luck next time, bro." But Hades doesn't rage or beg for a redo. He just nods once, the flicker of torchlight reflecting in his eyes. It's not punishment, it's balance. Every life needs a destination, and someone has to handle the recycling program of souls. That's Hades now, the quiet administrator of existence itself. A mainstream historical fact, this division of realms, sky, sea, underworld, is one of the earliest examples of divine compartmentalization in Indo-European mythology. It echoes older traditions where cosmic order depended on three domains, like the Vedic heavens, oceans, and underworld. Apparently, even eternity runs on triage. As you walk among the echoes of that fateful draw, you sense the brothers' personalities frozen in myth. Zeus, loud and restless, becomes king of lightning and law. Poseidon, temperamental, churns the seas with both creativity and tantrums. And Hades? He vanishes beneath the earth and starts building. Not a fortress of flame and torment, no, that would come centuries later from poets with an agenda, but a place of stillness, order, and boundaries. Historians still argue whether Hades' realm was originally viewed as gloomy punishment or necessary purification. Early sources suggest it wasn't all despair, more like a waiting room between lives, or maybe a divine customs office with fewer chairs. Souls entered, were processed, and then, well, Whatever came next wasn't really advertised. And yet, you can sense the weight of that decision pressing on Hades. His brothers go on to rule oceans and thunderclouds, while he inherits silence. The Greeks later described him as invisible, not just because he possessed a literal helmet of invisibility forged by the Cyclopes, but because he preferred to remain unseen. The mythic introvert of Mount Olympus. Here's a quirky tidbit. When that magical helmet was later borrowed by heroes like Perseus, yes, the one with Medusa, Hades didn't even seem to mind. Imagine lending out your one defining accessory and shrugging about it. That's how chill he was. You're standing now on the threshold of his domain. Picture an immense cavern that stretches in every direction, lit only by pale fires and drifting shades. The earth above pulses faintly, like the heartbeat of a distant animal. Each pulse drops loose stones and whispers names, regrets, prayers never answered. This is what Hades receives from the living, echoes. He begins to shape his kingdom methodically. No rush, no chaos, just quiet, efficient creation. He maps the rivers with mathematical precision, sets up regions for heroes, criminals, and the utterly average. If Zeus builds drama and Poseidon builds storms, Hades builds infrastructure. Somewhere, you suspect, a clerkly part of his heart enjoys the paperwork. Even so, it's lonely work. Imagine being a god whose domain nobody wants to visit, whose worshippers avoid saying his name out loud because it feels unlucky. People built grand temples for Zeus and wild festivals for Dionysus. But Hades? His ceremonies were private, whispered, often held at night or underground. The god of the unseen stayed unseen. Still, he's not bitter. Hades' justice is precise. Every soul gets what it earned, nothing more, nothing less. In his silence, there's fairness. Even the other gods have to respect that. After all, you can't throw lightning forever, eventually. Everyone ends up in his guest list. You feel a ripple through the gloom. Maybe Hades himself glancing upward, hearing his brother's laughter echo from Mount Olympus. Does he miss them? Does he care? Hard to say. Some myths hint that Hades felt relief being away from their chaos. Imagine a family reunion with eternal beings who all think they're in charge. No wonder he chose solitude. Yet the underworld is far from empty. Spirits drift here from every corner of the world. Heroes, poets, sailors, mothers, even those who slipped unnoticed from life. Hades becomes their custodian, their final bureaucrat. He listens, judges, and stores their stories like a vast cosmic library. Somewhere deep inside, he knows that silence is the truest form of memory. You might think ruling the dead is the worst gig imaginable. But consider the perks: 0 rebellions, 0 weather issues, and a workforce that literally can't quit. And of course, the crown jewels of the world, since everything buried belongs to him. He is Platon, the wealthy one. A title so comforting that mortals prefer to use it instead of his real name. Branding matters, even for gods. Historians still argue whether Hades was ever truly worshipped as Platon, or if that was just polite rebranding by nervous priests. Either way, it worked. The god of death became, ironically, a symbol of abundance. Crops spring from the earth he owns. Metals and gems glitter from his veins of rock. Every harvest is technically his loan to humanity. You look upward now, imagining the world above, the forests rustling, the seas glinting, Zeus's thunder rattling through clouds, and realize that all of it depends on this silent agreement between brothers. The living thrive because death keeps its distance. Hades maintains that boundary. Without him, the cycle collapses. Down here, the darkness feels different now, not cruel, not empty, but stable. It hums with the sound of eternity running smoothly. Somewhere far away, Hades moves across his halls, and the echoes of his footsteps mark the rhythm of existence itself. A faint glow flickers along the rock wall beside you. The first trace of the rivers he's begun to form. Soon you'll see them all: Styx, Lethe, Acheron, Phlegethon, Cocytus. Each river will whisper a different truth about what it means to be gone. But for now, you stand at the edge of creation's underbelly, listening as 3 brothers' destinies finally settle into place. Above you, thunder laughs. Below you, silence answers. Between them stands Hades, unseen, patient, already building eternity one stone at a time. You follow the hum of the deep, the sound of rock shaping itself under pressure, of stone remembering how to breathe. Hades is no longer just a name now. He's a presence, filling the cavern with purpose. You can almost sense him drafting the blueprints of the underworld in his mind. If Zeus builds heavens and Poseidon builds tides, Hades builds something quieter and more precise, a kingdom that must function without end. It's a strange task, creating order from absence. There's no sunlight, no breeze, no birdsong to fill the space. Only the steady drip of subterranean water and the faint sighs of souls that haven't yet learned to let go. You watch as Hades moves through the void, marking boundaries with his staff. The earth responds to him, folding and carving itself into layers, the beginning of a landscape that will outlast empires. He starts with the rivers, sketching their paths like arteries of the afterlife. The Styx, cold and shimmering, becomes the border no god may cross without swearing oaths. Acheron coils beside it, filled with the tears of those who died before their time. Phlegethon hisses through tunnels like molten blood, while Cocytus sobs endlessly over rocks polished by grief. And somewhere, winding quietly through them all, is Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. You can almost hear it, a gentle trickle that erases names, memories, and regrets. A kindness disguised as oblivion. Later philosophers will argue whether it's mercy or cruelty, but right now it just sounds peaceful, like the static between dreams. A mainstream historical fact, the ancient Greeks often located entrances to the underworld in real geography. There were caves at Taenarum, Avernus, and even near the Necromantian in Epirus, where people believed the veil between life and death was thinner. Travelers would descend with offerings and come back pale, trembling, swearing they'd heard the voices of their ancestors. Archaeologists still debate whether these sites were religious centers or just really well-marketed tourist traps. Hades builds with precision. No wasted gestures, no fireworks. He creates zones for different types of souls, meadows for the average, fields of asphodel where the unremarkable drift, like leaves in fog. There's a bleak efficiency to it all. Death, he seems to understand, doesn't need grandeur. It needs routine. Historians still argue whether the Greek underworld had fixed geography or changed depending on poetic invention. Some texts describe 7 gates, others 5. A few claim the Styx circles 9 times, wrapping eternity in loops. It's as though even scholars can't agree on how to read a map no mortal was meant to see. Still, Hades knows his design. He carves palaces from obsidian and basalt, tall and quiet, like inverted temples. The ceiling drips faint minerals that sparkle like slow-motion stars. When the first torches are lit, flames of pale green, they don't flicker, they sway, as if breathing with the kingdom itself. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient poets sometimes said Hades' palace had doors made of bronze so heavy that not even gods could lift them once they were sealed. But they also claimed the hinges creak constantly, reminding the living that the dead are never entirely silent. Ancient horror ambience, basically. As you walk through these halls, you realize that Hades isn't decorating for vanity. He's building boundaries. His realm needs to contain everything that has ever lived. Every laugh, every breath, every drop of blood returns here as quiet energy. No leaks allowed. The rivers, the gates, the guardians, they're all systems in an eternal engine. You pause at the first of the gates, half carved into the earth. The stone is smooth where countless hands have touched it, yet no one has passed through yet. Hades runs his hand along the lintel, inscribing ancient runes that pulse once and fade. They aren't words you understand, but they feel like an equation, a formula of balance between endings and beginnings. Up above, the world carries on oblivious. The first temples rise to Zeus. The seas churn with Poseidon's moods. Mortals are inventing plows, fire pits, and fresh mistakes. But beneath them, this place grows, root-like, inevitable. Sometimes, when Hades pauses in his labor, he listens to the muffled footsteps of the living far above. Maybe he wonders what sunlight feels like now. Maybe he doesn't. There's calm and detachment, a peace that his brothers might never know. You can feel that calm spreading around you. It's not the stillness of emptiness, but of completion. Each tunnel, each corridor, Each bridge over the churning rivers adds another layer of order. Hades is building eternity's version of a city, one that never expands outward, only deeper. And yet, despite his precision, there's something strangely tender in the way he shapes it. You notice how he leaves spaces of quiet beauty, a field where asphodel blooms glow faintly blue, a terrace where echoes linger longer than they should. Maybe even gods crave art, even if it's made from shadows. Historians still argue whether early depictions of Hades included such gentleness, or if later poets added it to make him sympathetic. But really, what's a god without contradictions? He's the unseen one, yet everything he makes is designed to be seen by those who no longer can. The first souls arrive quietly, like a sigh after a storm. They drift in, hesitant, confused, still half remembering warmth. Hades greets them not with fire or fury, but with procedure. He gestures toward the ferryman, who will later become legend Charon, though right now he's more of an intern with a lantern and zero customer service training. You watch as the shades file in, coin by coin, across the dim river. There's a strange beauty in it, an acceptance. The living fight endings, the dead simply float. Here's a small moment of levity. A soul without payment tries to haggle with Charon, waving a shiny pebble and insisting it's basically currency. Charon stares in silence until the pebble sinks itself out of shame. Even in eternity, there's bureaucracy. When the last shade crosses, Hades turns back toward his palace. His realm is no longer an empty cave. It's breathing, pulsing, alive in its own way. And though no sunlight will ever touch these stones, they glow with a strange, internal light, like memory itself. As you follow him deeper into the dark, you realize that death isn't a void. It's structure. The underworld isn't about fear. It's about keeping the chaos of existence neatly filed. And Hades, ever the patient architect, is only just getting started. The rivers are ready. The gates are in place. The underworld hums like a freshly tuned instrument. Soon it will sing. You step forward, and the hum becomes a roar, not of chaos, but of movement. The underworld is no longer an unfinished plan. It's breathing alive, threaded with 5 vast rivers that weave through stone like veins through a giant's arm. The air shivers with moisture and the faint metallic tang of minerals. Hades watches the current, his expression unreadable. You realize he's not just admiring the view. He's calibrating eternity's plumbing. The first river you reach is the Styx. It glows black, which shouldn't be possible, and yet somehow it is. Liquid night that ripples like ink under moonlight. This is the river of oaths, the sacred line even gods fear to cross. When the Olympians swear by it, the consequence of lying is not lightning or exile, but something worse. 10 years of divine paralysis. Zeus himself once trembled over it, clutching his chest like a student caught cheating mid-oath. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks genuinely believed swearing by the Styx was the highest possible vow. Even Homer's gods in the Iliad invoked it with dread. Scholars suspect this superstition may have been a metaphor for the irreversible nature of death. Cross the Styx, and your word becomes as permanent as your afterlife. Hades doesn't smile, but you sense a quiet satisfaction. The Styx ensures order. It's the border he needed, the line between realms, truth, and deceit. Beside it, pale mist clings to your ankles like nervous cats. Then there's Acheron, the river of sorrow. You can hear it long before you see it. The muffled weeping of the newly dead, the rustle of lost memories dissolving into the current. The water isn't black like Styx, it's a cloudy gray blue, like smoke trapped in glass. Souls approach it slowly, guided by Charon's lantern. They don't scream or beg, they murmur, as if apologizing to existence itself. You crouch beside the water, and for a heartbeat, you hear voices that sound almost familiar. Someone saying your name, perhaps, or maybe just the echo of it. It's unsettling, but strangely comforting, too. The Acheron is grief distilled into geography. Historians still argue whether Acheron was a literal river in Epirus or purely mythic. Ancient travelers reported hearing unearthly sounds from its waters. Most modern scholars think it was just wind in the canyons, but a few romantics insist it was something else, a resonance between worlds. A few steps later, the air grows warmer, almost feverish. You've reached Phlegethon, the river of fire. Its current burns without consuming, light dancing off its molten surface. The heat here doesn't hurt. It feels like standing near a forge, equal parts danger and comfort. Hades stands at its edge, his shadow flickering orange. This river, he says quietly, is for purification. Some souls need burning to forget themselves. You half expect demons with pitchforks, but there's only stillness. The flames lap lazily, reflecting like liquid sunset. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early philosophers thought Phlegethon might represent volcanic activity. The Greeks loved connecting myth to geology, because when your backyard has actual lava, you don't need imagination, you just need names. As you continue, the temperature drops again. You find yourself at Cocytus, the river of lamentation. It doesn't flow so much as it drips, endlessly, from unseen heights. Every drop carries a whisper, a regret, a wish, a half-formed apology. Standing here feels like listening to every sad song ever written, played backward and underwater. Even Hades seems contemplative near Cocytus. You can sense him weighing every tear, as though they're entries in an invisible ledger. Nothing here is wasted, even grief gets recycled. And finally Lethe. You almost miss it at first. It's quiet, pale, and tranquil, winding through the shadows like silk. The river of forgetfulness. Souls come here to drink, to shed the weight of memory before drifting toward their eternal rest. Or, some say, before being reborn. The surface gleams faintly, reflecting nothing. When you look at it, you feel an ache behind your eyes, like your thoughts are being gently brushed away. Hades notices and lifts a hand, stopping you before you can step closer. Not yet, he murmurs, his voice low and deliberate. You still need your memories. You nod, though part of you wonders if forgetting might actually feel peaceful. Historians still argue whether Lethe's water symbolized mercy or erasure. Philosophers like Plato later reinterpreted it as the cleansing of the soul before reincarnation, while poets saw it as tragic oblivion. Either way, it proves the Greeks understood something about rest, that sometimes peace requires unknowing. You stand now on a bridge spanning all 5 rivers, watching their colors blend in the distance, black, gray, red, clear, and pale blue. Together, they form the arteries of the afterlife, flowing into and out of one another in eternal circulation. Each current hums with a different emotion, yet somehow they harmonize. A moment of humor breaks the heaviness. Charon, the eternally grumpy ferryman, is fishing in Phlegethon with a metal hook. You watch him pull up what looks suspiciously like a half-melted helmet. He sighs, mutters something about heroes leaving junk everywhere, and tosses it back. Even the dead have littering problems. Hades surveys the scene with faint approval. The underworld is functioning. Souls enter, cross the rivers, and move toward judgment. Balance is established. It's not paradise, but it's precise. You realize that in this myth, rivers aren't barriers, they're systems of emotion. Each one carries something the living struggle to handle. Truth, grief, pain, regret, and release. Hades, ever the quiet engineer, turns human experience into geography. Above, the mortal world spins on, oblivious. But down here, beneath the roots of existence, you can feel a kind of order that no storm or empire can break. The rivers flow forever, their surfaces smooth as glass. Every drop whispers stories you almost remember, stories of how life always ends in water. And somewhere downstream, the current bends toward a throne made of black stone and polished bones, where Hades will soon take his seat as king. For now, he watches the rivers with calm eyes, and for the first time, the darkness seems to relax around him. The air steadies again. The roar of rivers fades behind you until it's nothing but a soft pulse, like blood echoing in your ears. You're walking through a quieter part of the underworld now, where the walls curve gently inward and the torchlight flickers as though the stone itself is breathing. This is the kingdom complete, and the god who rules it finally pauses long enough to look around. Hades stands at the heart of his realm, silent but present. His armor is forged from shadows that glimmer like polished coal, and his helm, yes, the famous helmet of invisibility, rests under his arm, a tool he rarely needs anymore. Here, everyone already feels unseen. You watch him survey his work, and for the first time, you sense something that feels dangerously close to satisfaction. It's strange to think of him as anything but grim. The poets painted Hades as dour, terrifying, almost allergic to joy. But when you see him here, you realize he's not cruel. He's careful. There's order in his stillness, precision in the way he moves. If Zeus is thunder and Poseidon is waves, Hades is gravity. Always pulling, never shouting. A mainstream historical fact, in early Greek religion, Hades wasn't considered evil. There was no hell in the modern sense. Souls didn't go below to burn forever. They went to exist in quiet reflection. The later image of the fiery underworld came centuries later, borrowed by other cultures, and amplified by poets looking for drama. The original Hades was more like a divine accountant, serious, but not sadistic. He walks through his palace now, the floor carved from black marble that reflects every torch twice. The walls are lined with pale minerals that glow faintly, like moonlight trapped underground. There are no gold statues, no drunken feasts like on Olympus. Just space, and the steady echo of footsteps that will never stop. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly feared Hades himself or just the concept of death he embodied. Some records show that people made offerings to him, not to curry favor, but to keep him content. Appease, not please. As one fragment of an old inscription puts it, it's an oddly polite relationship with mortality. You watch as a line of shades approaches. They move like mist, forming faint shapes that flicker between memory and forgetfulness. Hades greets them with calm efficiency. There's no shouting of judgments, no gongs or flames. He gestures once, and the shades drift toward their appropriate regions. A flicker of blue light marks acceptance. A faint crimson glow means a longer stay. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Orphic traditions, Hades was believed to have kept meticulous records of every soul's deeds, stored in ledgers made from obsidian. The myth implies there's cosmic paperwork involved in dying, an idea both amusing and horrifying. Imagine eternity's DMV, but run with actual competence. You trail after Hades as he moves through his halls. Every now and then, he pauses to adjust something, a flickering flame, a crooked step, a draft that shouldn't exist. It's like he can feel imbalance before it even starts. You get the sense he doesn't just rule the underworld. He maintains it, like a caretaker who refuses to let the universe fall apart. It's quiet here, almost too quiet. The silence presses against your chest like deep water. Hades doesn't seem to mind. In fact, you think he prefers it. Maybe that's why he rarely visits Olympus. Up there, the noise must be unbearable. Thunder, feasting, gossip, petty divine squabbles. Down here, there's no chaos. Just the slow rhythm of existence unspooling. A faint, dry chuckle breaks the stillness. You glance around, startled, before realizing. It came from Hades. He's laughing. It's not loud. More like the sound of rock cracking gently under strain. You can't tell what amused him, but it's a reminder that even death has a sense of humor. Maybe he's thinking about how mortals imagine his world. Endless flames, red devils, endless torment. If only they knew the truth, that eternity's scariest being spends his days managing cosmic spreadsheets. He sits down on the edge of a blackstone dais. For a moment, the shadows relax, and you catch a glimpse of something human in his stillness. Maybe loneliness. Maybe just the weight of endless duty. Hades doesn't get weekends off. Souls never stop arriving. And though he never complains, there's a faint weariness in the way his shoulders slope. Historians still argue whether Hades loved his role or merely accepted it. Some texts paint him as resigned, others as quietly proud. Maybe it doesn't matter. After enough millennia, duty becomes identity. When you've built eternity, there's no quitting halfway. You start noticing small signs of life, or afterlife, at least. Shades whisper greetings. Little creatures made of mist scurry between cracks, carrying messages. Somewhere, a faint tune hums through the stone, a chorus of spirits, maybe, or the underworld's version of wind. The air isn't oppressive anymore, it's rhythmic, like the world's slowest heartbeat. Then something unexpected happens. A spirit small, uncertain, breaks from the line and drifts up to Hades. It's a child, or what's left of one, carrying a wilted flower. The shade offers it wordlessly. Hades doesn't flinch. He kneels, takes the flower gently, and places it beside a torch. For an instant, the blossom glows faintly blue, restored. The child vanishes, finally at peace. You realize, in that quiet moment, that this is why he's suited for this realm. Death isn't cruelty, it's mercy done meticulously. Hades doesn't steal souls, he receives them. Like a librarian shelving stories that the living have finished writing. You hear a low rumble far away, just the earth settling, or maybe the gods above remembering he exists. Hades glances upward for half a second, as though hearing the echo of Olympus. He doesn't scowl or sigh. He just smiles faintly, the kind of smile you make when you already know how the story ends. Above ground, mortals are still naming their children after Zeus and Poseidon, still telling stories about the exciting gods who throw lightning and cause earthquakes. But down here, you get the sense that Hades is fine with being forgotten. Someone has to hold the silence, after all. Someone has to keep eternity tidy. As you move further into the shadows, the soft glow of the rivers reflects faintly off the black marble walls. It feels less like you're in a prison, and more like you're inside the world's heartbeat, moving in rhythm with its pulse. And somewhere in that stillness, you think you hear Hades murmur something, too soft to catch entirely, but you understand the tone. It's not a warning. It's a welcome. The scene drifts onward, like a slow exhale through the tunnels of eternity. You follow Hades deeper still, past the organized grandeur of his throne hall, down into the living veins of his realm. Here, the underworld stretches outward in strange directions, divided into its legendary regions. Each one breathes with its own mood, its own strange rhythm. You can almost hear them calling, overlapping like the low harmonies of a choir that never stops singing. Ahead lies the asphodel meadows, that soft gray expanse where most mortal souls end up. The ground looks like ashes braided with pale roots. The air hums faintly, like a forgotten lullaby. Countless shades drift there, not in torment or joy, but in that peculiar neutrality that mortals call rest. They wander in endless circles, whispering fragments of their former lives, sometimes bumping into one another and apologizing in voices like paper tearing. You step closer, half expecting a grand revelation, but it's just quiet. You recognize faces that look almost familiar. Maybe you've seen them in museums, carved on old vases. Soldiers, potters, shepherds, queens. Here, they're all equal, stripped of glory and guilt alike. The underworld doesn't care about your resume. One mainstream historical fact: the Greeks believed most souls went to the asphodel meadows, not to Elysium or Tartarus. Those extremes were rare. Heroes and villains made great stories, but in truth, the afterlife was mostly average, eternal middle management. It's oddly comforting. The majority of humanity, it turns out, just gets to rest in slightly foggy peace. You walk through the meadow, brushing ghostly petals that crumble like frosted dawn. There's something almost hypnotic about it. The shade sways slightly, as though in a dance too slow for music. Once in a while a breeze, if that's what it is, ripples through, carrying whispers of forgotten languages. You think you catch your name, but maybe you just want to. Hades moves among them unseen. Even here, his presence brings a small sense of order. The meadows part where he walks, and the shades bow instinctively. You realize he doesn't need to speak. The realm itself reacts to him, reshaping itself in his wake. Historians still argue whether Hades was truly omnipresent in his kingdom or if the Greeks saw him more as a distant administrator. Some hymns describe him as everywhere at once, the soil beneath your feet, the shadow of your shadow. Others imply he was more like a king working from home, rarely seen, but whose rules shaped everything. Either way, the result feels the same. You can't go anywhere here without brushing against his will. A flicker of gold catches your eye. Far off, beyond the gray, lies a brighter field, the Elysian plain. You can't help but drift toward it. The air there is warmer, the mist thinner, and you swear you hear faint laughter. This is the realm of heroes, where mortals favored by the gods come to dwell after death. Not the loud, beer-chugging Valhalla sort of heroism, but something more serene. A quirky tidbit: some later poets claimed Elysium had perfect weather, eternal spring, soft breezes, and weirdly no mosquitoes. It's unclear if that was divine intervention or just poetic wishful thinking. Either way, Elysium sounds like Greece's version of a luxury resort with no checkout date. As you approach, you notice the difference immediately. The souls here have color, soft, glowing outlines that shimmer faintly like heat on stone. They walk among blooming groves and rivers that glint like liquid quartz. You recognize one or two mythic faces: Achilles brooding by the water, Orpheus plucking at a lyre strung for moonlight. Hades doesn't linger here long. Elysium runs itself, governed by souls who've long since forgotten pain. The god gives a small nod, almost like a parent peeking in on a sleeping child, then turns away. It's not his favorite place. You can sense that. Joy doesn't interest him, balance does. Past Elysium, the air tightens again. You descend further still, down a slope slick with condensation, into a cavern lit by dull red veins. The temperature drops, paradoxically, as though heat itself refuses to touch this place. This is Tartarus, the lowest depth, where the worst of the worst reside. Titans chained in unbreakable bonds. Crimes so cosmic that only eternity could serve as punishment. The roar of unseen storms rolls through the chasm. Chains groan in rhythm. You catch flashes of colossal forms, writhing shadows the size of mountains. One lifts its head slightly, eyes glowing like twin comets, and you instantly look away. You don't want to know its name. Hades stops at the edge, watching silently. There's no cruelty in his gaze, just accountability. Every soul here earned their stay. Every chain was justified, at least. That's the myth. Historians still argue whether Tartarus was a literal place or a symbolic one, a mythic courtroom meant to explain why cosmic chaos had to be restrained. Whatever it was, it made a great cautionary tale for mortals with delusions of grandeur. He turns back, and you follow, grateful for the cooler, quieter air of the upper tunnels. You pass by smaller chambers, pockets of strange magic, where shades replay memories like holograms, or sit beside pools reflecting the lives they once had. Some reach out to the surface, hoping for the prayers of loved ones. Others just wait, patient as dust. You start to realize how vast this place really is. The underworld isn't just one realm. It's a cosmos of its own, layered and pulsing, each part designed with intention. You think back to Hades himself, the quiet architect of all this. No storms, no drama, just infinite management. You almost laugh at the thought. Even in death, bureaucracy wins. Maybe that's humanity's greatest curse. But you can't help admiring it too. There's beauty in the structure, in knowing that, however strange or unfair life seems above, down here everything balances out. Somewhere, deep in the tunnels, you hear faint music again. The same rhythm from the rivers. It's slower now, steadier, like a lullaby played on stone. And as the sound wraps around you, you realize something important. This isn't a place of fear. It's a system, an ancient, deliberate order designed to cradle the chaos of existence. You take a long breath, though breathing doesn't really apply here, and look back one last time. The meadows stretch endlessly, the rivers shimmer in the dark, and the faint glow of Elysium flickers like a candle far away. Hades stands at the center of it all, silent, immovable, the pulse that keeps the cosmos balanced. And for a moment, you feel something you didn't expect: peace. You walk alongside Hades again, though you're not sure whether your feet touch ground anymore. The floor feels more like memory than matter, as if the act of remembering is what holds your weight. The silence stretches between you, and in that hush, something begins to change. The underworld itself seems to hum with restless energy. The shades drift faster, the air tightens, and the faint golden light from Elysium dims like a candle drawn into shadow. Something is missing here, you realize. The kingdom feels complete, yes, but sterile, like a library with no new books. And that's when the thought strikes you. What is a ruler without companionship? What is a god without something, or someone, to care for beyond duty? Above, in the sunlit world, that question is about to find an answer. Because while Hades watches his realm, Demeter's daughter, Persephone, gathers flowers in a bright green field far from here, unaware that her life is about to change forever. You see her now, as if the underworld itself projects the memory onto its walls. The meadows above gleam under blinding daylight. Persephone moves through them barefoot, trailing petals in her wake. The world bends toward her, flowers bloom faster. The wind hushes just to hear her laugh. There's something about her presence that makes the land itself more alive. You almost feel bad for her. Beauty like that always catches divine attention. A mainstream historical fact, the story of Persephone was one of the most important in Greek religion. It wasn't just a myth, it explained the seasons. Her descent into and return from the underworld symbolized the cycle of death and rebirth, winter and spring. It was central to the Eleusinian mysteries, ancient rites so secret that no one ever dared record their details. Historians still argue about what actually happened in those ceremonies, but whatever it was, it changed how mortals understood life and death. You sense Hades watching from below, not with hunger, but with longing. He's seen everything, the cruelty of kings, the cries of heroes, the endless shuffle of souls. And now, for the first time in eternity, something stirs in him that isn't duty. He rises from his throne, the shadows coiling at his feet, like loyal hounds. The fates themselves glance up, startled, as he passes. It's not often that the god of the dead leaves his realm. The rivers tremble when he does. A quirky tidbit. According to some lesser-known versions of the myth, Hades didn't emerge from the ground in a fiery chariot. He came quietly, disguised as a mortal traveler who followed Persephone for days before revealing himself. That image, death walking unnoticed among the living, still gives scholars goosebumps. But the popular tale is more dramatic. You feel the tremor before you see it. The meadow splits open, a crack yawning wide like a deep sigh from the earth. Flowers scatter. The wind shrieks. Persephone turns, her eyes wide, as black stallions surge upward, pulling a chariot made of obsidian and gold. The driver's helm gleams with invisible light, and though she cannot see his face, she feels his power. Before she can scream, the ground closes over them. The petals fall slowly, landing where she stood. The meadow goes still. Down below, the underworld erupts into motion. Rivers ripple backward, torches flare to life, and the walls themselves seem to murmur. She is here. The entire realm reacts like a held breath, finally released. You follow the procession as the chariot glides through the tunnels, the horse's hooves sparking blue light. Hades sits beside Persephone, stoic, silent, but his gaze flickers, uncertain for the first time in millennia. She trembles, caught between fury and awe. You can almost hear her heart pounding against eternity's walls. They arrive in his great hall, and the shadows themselves bow. The air shifts. The underworld, so long balanced in sterile calm, suddenly feels alive again. There's color now, a faint blush in the marble, a pulse in the air, like spring daring to bloom underground. Historians still argue whether the abduction of Persephone was an act of violence, of divine order, or of cosmic necessity. Some say Zeus himself arranged the match, knowing that life and death needed to be bound together. Others insist it was pure passion, an impulsive, lonely act from a god who had never known love. No single interpretation fits neatly. Maybe that's the point. Myths rarely reward binary thinking. Persephone stares at her surroundings, those vast, cold halls filled with flickering torches and whispering walls. She demands to be returned. Her voice echoes, shaking the marble. Hades doesn't argue. He just listens. You realize he's not used to noise, especially not righteous fury. And here's the strangest thing. He doesn't strike her down, doesn't threaten or plead. He offers her a seat beside him. A single seat, carved from dark crystal, waiting as though it's been empty for centuries. You can almost sense the conversation that follows, halting, strange, full of mutual misunderstanding. She speaks of sunlight, of dancing nymphs, of laughter and warmth. He listens, fascinated. He tells her about the rivers, about balance, about the weight of keeping order when everyone else looks away. She doesn't soften, not yet, but something shifts between them. A quirky side note scholars love. In certain mystery cults, Persephone was called the bringer of life, even while ruling the dead. It's one of mythology's most poetic paradoxes, that the goddess of flowers found her throne in darkness. You glance around the hall again. The shade stands still, almost reverent. Even they sense it, something new growing here. Hades doesn't smile, but his voice, when he finally speaks, carries warmth. You belong to no one, he says quietly. But if you stay, you will rule beside me. That line isn't in the mainstream myth, but it feels right, doesn't it? Far above, the world withers. Crops fail. Demeter wanders the earth, searching for her daughter, her grief freezing rivers and killing fields. The mortals suffer. The gods begin to panic. The balance of life and death, light and dark, is fracturing. And deep below, two figures sit in silence, divided by everything, bound by something neither yet understands. The underworld holds its breath. The first seed of change has been planted. Time in the underworld doesn't flow like it does above. It loops, folds, drifts, like ripples on a pond that never stills. Days mean nothing down here, but you can feel the slow rhythm of adjustment. Persephone's presence has altered everything. The air is softer, the shadows gentler, as though the realm itself is trying to make her comfortable. She walks its halls, refusing to be cowed. The shades pause and bow as she passes. The torches flicker brighter when she draws near. Hades watches, always from a short distance, silent as gravity. He doesn't speak much, not because he's cruel, but because words, to him, have weight. When you live among echoes, you learn to use them sparingly. At first, Persephone resists everything. She avoids his gaze, refuses his feasts, spends hours staring into the pale glow of the sticks. You can almost hear her thoughts. This isn't where I belong. And she's right. But the underworld, patient as stone, has a way of reshaping what belonging means. One mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed Persephone wasn't just a victim. In older versions of the myth, before the dramatist softened her, she was a dual queen who willingly chose to descend each year. Her journey wasn't just about loss, but about balance. Life must visit death for the world to keep turning. Historians still argue whether her abduction was later moralizing, a way to make her story more palatable to patriarchal audiences. Down here, you can see both versions at once. Some moments, she's frightened. Others, she's fiercely curious. The dead tell her their stories, lives full of laughter, regret, small heroics, petty mistakes. She listens. She asks questions. You realize she's not judging them. She's studying them, learning what it means to end. You follow her as she explores the meadows of asphodel. The shades cluster around her like moths to a candle. When she touches the ground, small flowers bloom, pale blossoms that shimmer faintly in the dim light. Even Hades seems startled by it. No living thing had ever dared grow in his kingdom before. A quirky tidbit, in a few Orphic hymns, Persephone is called the one who makes even Hades smile. Imagine that, the god of shadows, centuries deep in stoic professionalism, suddenly learning what joy feels like. You almost picture him practicing a smile in a mirror made of obsidian and immediately regretting it. He doesn't understand her brightness at first. He tries to offer her gifts, jewels mined from the deepest rock, torches that never burn out, crowns of iron and gold. She thanks him politely, but declines them all. She wants sunlight, wind, and laughter, none of which the underworld can give. Historians still argue whether this middle period in the myth symbolizes emotional growth or cosmic tension. Some say it represents the balance of opposites, life adapting to death, darkness learning gentleness. Others interpret it as divine domestic drama, the awkward courtship phase of two immortals trapped together with no exit strategy. Either way, something subtle begins to shift. One day, Persephone sits beside the pool of memory, watching ripples shimmer on its surface. The shades have gathered again, singing softly. She listens, and without thinking, hums along. The notes thread through the air like silver threads, wrapping the entire cavern in a melody so soft it almost feels like breath. Hades appears quietly behind her. He doesn't interrupt. When she finally notices him, she stops, halfway embarrassed. "I didn't mean to disturb your silence," she says. He shakes his head. It's been silent too long. That's the first real conversation between them that doesn't feel like battle. You sense the fragile equilibrium forming, respect, curiosity, maybe even tenderness. It's strange watching them both learn what companionship means in a place built for solitude. A faint tremor runs through the ground. Hades looks up. Even you can sense it, the pull from above. Demeter's grief has reached divine proportions. Crops are failing. Temples stand empty. Mortals are dying in droves. The world above is starving. You can almost hear the gods arguing somewhere far beyond the stone ceiling. Zeus shouting, Hermes pacing, Poseidon rolling his eyes dramatically. The council debates what to do. They can't let mortals perish, but they can't force Hades to give up Persephone either. She's his equal now, in ways none of them expected. It's Hermes who finally volunteers to go below. He's always been good at that, crossing thresholds, skirting rules, charming everyone he meets. You watch as he descends, his golden sandals shimmering like small suns against the dark. He doesn't knock. Gods rarely do. Persephone sees him first and runs to him with the relief of someone who's been holding her breath for months. Hermes smiles, too bright for this place, and tells her of the world above, her mother's endless mourning, the dying harvest, the desperate prayers. You have to return, he says softly. The earth needs you. Hades stands back, unreadable. He doesn't protest. He doesn't command. He just looks at her, the faintest flicker of loss crossing his features. For all his power, this moment makes him look very small. Then comes the fruit, a mainstream element of the myth. You probably remember, before Persephone leaves, Hades offers her a pomegranate. 6 seeds, crimson as spilled sunlight. Some versions say she eats them willingly. Others claim he tricks her. Either way, once tasted, she's bound to return. Life and death are entwined forever. A quirky historical aside, ancient Greeks associated pomegranates with both fertility and funerary rites, an almost poetic contradiction. They were offered at weddings and at graves. Maybe that's why this fruit became the perfect symbol of Persephone herself, half springtime, half shadow. You watch as she lifts one seed to her lips. The sound of it breaking between her teeth echoes through eternity. Hades doesn't smile. He just bows his head, accepting what must be. When she steps into Hermes' light, the world above begins to thaw. Snow melts. Rivers burst from their icy prisons. Fields bloom again in wild, reckless color. Demeter rushes to meet her daughter, their embrace so fierce the mountains themselves tremble. But even as Persephone laughs under the open sky, part of her feels the pull of the dark below. She's tasted something she can't unlearn, the stillness, the gravity, the strange comfort of Hades' realm. Historians still argue whether that seed was curse or gift. Maybe it was both. Maybe, like most things divine, it simply was. And far below, the god of shadows stands alone in his quiet hall, staring at the single bloom Persephone left behind, a pale flower that somehow refuses to die. The underworld has changed forever. The underworld feels emptier now. The torchlight still flickers, the rivers still murmur, but there's a hollowness in the air, like the echo after music fades. Hades walks through his kingdom again, slow and deliberate, yet the rhythm of his steps no longer matches the heartbeat of the realm. Something vital has gone missing, and not even he can deny it. Persephone's absence has left a strange aftertaste. The flowers she coaxed from the stone have wilted into fine white dust, clinging to the corners of the great hall. The shades wander more aimlessly, unsure whether to be solemn or hopeful. Even Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed guardian, lies curled beside the gates, snoring softly, one ear twitching whenever a whisper of her name drifts by. You trail behind Hades as he moves through his silent dominion. He stops by the edge of the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and stares into its surface. For the first time, the reflection that looks back at him isn't still. It shivers, like a heartbeat under glass. A mainstream historical fact. In Greek ritual practice, initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries believed that by learning Persephone's story, they could overcome their fear of death. It wasn't just myth, it was theology. The promise was simple yet profound. Death is not an end, but a return. The myth of Hades and Persephone became humanity's earliest whispered hope that something continues beyond the dark. Hades doesn't think in those terms, of course. He's not sentimental. But even he can't escape the symbolism. Persephone brought more than color to his halls. She brought meaning. And now, as months pass in mortal reckoning, he feels time pressing again, that subtle ache of waiting. You drift after him into the quieter chambers where the souls of poets dwell. They murmur verses that sound like wind through reeds, half-remembered lines of lives once bright. One voice rises above the rest, a woman's, clear and calm. It's Sappho, or what remains of her, reciting a hymn to love and loss. Even Hades pauses to listen. You can almost see the faintest tilt of his head, as if the words wound him in the gentlest way. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars claim that the Orphic sects taught their initiates that Persephone was the mother of Dionysus. Yes, the god of wine and ecstatic chaos might have been born from Death's queen herself. That connection between the underworld and wild celebration still fascinates classicists today. It's like finding out the goddess of stillness secretly through the best afterlife parties. The hall shimmers briefly, like the air is remembering her. The torches flare without wind. You realize the realm isn't lifeless. It's in a kind of dormancy, like the earth in winter, waiting. Up above, the world thrives. Demeter laughs again. Farmers bless their fields. Temples fill with offerings, and the poets sing hymns of gratitude to the gods who restored spring. But the joy is temporary. The cycle knows what's coming. When the months shift and the world leans again toward chill and shadow, Demeter begins to fade. She looks toward the sky each evening, waiting for the first frost. And in the underworld, Hades feels it too, a tug, soft but insistent, as though the universe itself is turning its gears. Historians still argue whether the Greeks believed Persephone's return to the underworld was a punishment or a duty. The line between the two blurs with every retelling. But here, in this dim kingdom, it feels more like gravity, inevitable, natural, the quiet pull of balance restoring itself. You hear it before you see it, the sound of approaching hooves, the same black chariot, the same thunder of unseen wings. The rivers swell as if in welcome. Hades stands at the gates, his posture still, but his eyes alive with something almost like anticipation. Then she's there. Persephone steps through the gloom, like dawn sneaking back into night. Her hair carries the scent of sunlight and wheat. Her hands, though pale, still hold the memory of warmth. The shades whisper her name, their voices trembling like wind through reeds. Even Cerberus lifts his head, tails wagging in uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Persephone meets Hades' gaze. There's no fear this time, only recognition. It's colder above, she says softly. The earth misses me. And so does the dark, he replies. That's all it takes. No grand reunion. No thunderous declarations, just quiet acceptance, like two halves of the same heartbeat realigning. She walks beside him through the hall, and as she does, life begins to bloom again in the stone. Small flowers push through cracks. The rivers run brighter. The torches glow warmer. A mainstream fact with poetic irony. In Greek art, Hades and Persephone were often depicted sitting side by side on twin thrones, holding symbols of balance. He with a staff, she with a torch or pomegranate. Not lovers in the mortal sense, but sovereigns, partners in maintaining cosmic rhythm. The living rarely see it that way, but Death's kingdom runs on cooperation. Hades gestures toward the empty dais beside his throne. This time, Persephone sits without hesitation. The shadows shift around her, welcoming her like an old friend. The two exchange no vows, no speeches. The silence says everything. Historians still argue whether this balance between them was meant as metaphor, life depending on death, love on absence, or as divine domestic arrangement. Either way, it became one of mythology's most enduring patterns. You can feel it now, even in your bones. The ebb and flow, the inhale and exhale that governs everything. Months pass again. Above, mortals mark the seasons. Below, Hades and Persephone rule. Together, they judge the souls that arrive, soothe the restless, maintain the river's flow. She brings compassion where he brings order. He offers steadiness where she brings grace. It's not romance the way mortals imagine it, it's symmetry. One day, a new shade approaches, an elderly priest who spent his life honoring them both. He bows deeply and murmurs, "Blessed are those who understand the dark." Persephone smiles faintly. Hades inclines his head. For once, both gods seem at peace with their shared paradox. And as you stand there, in the eternal twilight between torchlight and shadow, you realize something extraordinary. The myth isn't about abduction or dominance, or even love. It's about necessity, about how even the gods must compromise with time. The rivers hum again, soft and sure. The world above will freeze and thaw, die and bloom, over and over, each turn a reminder of the bargain between the living and the dead. And here below, in this quiet kingdom, two figures sit side by side, holding that balance together, forever alternating between separation and return. You feel the underworld breathe again. If you didn't already know better, you'd swear the shadows pulse faintly to some secret rhythm, like the slow, steady thrum of the universe reminding itself to keep moving. Hades and Persephone sit side by side now, their thrones carved from a single seamless block of obsidian, polished so smooth you could lose yourself staring into it. The flicker of the torches paints soft ripples across their faces, making them look both ancient and newly born. You linger near the edge of the great hall as the day, or whatever counts as a day down here, begins to unfold. There's work to do. The dead never stop arriving. From the river Acheron comes a steady stream of souls, each one clutching a single obol, the coin they carried under their tongue for passage. Charon, the boatman, ferries them across, humming something that sounds suspiciously like an off-key lullaby. He doesn't even bother to count the money anymore. Inflation, probably. A mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists have actually uncovered burials in Greece, Italy, and even the Black Sea region containing coins in the mouth or on the eyes of the deceased, proof of how deeply the myth of Charon's toll rooted itself into ancient funerary practice. The dead literally paid their fare to the next world. Persephone watches the procession quietly. When the souls step onto the black shore, she raises her torch, a soft blue flame this time, not fire but phosphorescence. It doesn't burn, it soothes. Each soul passes beneath its glow before vanishing into one of three paths. To the right lies Elysium, the fields of bliss. To the left, Tartarus, the pit of punishment. Straight ahead, the gray plains of Asphodel, where most wander in endless neutrality, neither tormented nor rewarded, just drifting in the hush of eternity. You notice the way Persephone gestures, with a kind of maternal patience, her expression calm, almost wistful. She sees every soul as if it's a returning child, even those destined for the darker corners. Beside her, Hades speaks rarely. When he does, his voice vibrates through the stone, like the low roll of distant thunder. "Another 1,000 from the plague in Thebes," he murmurs to her. "They'll need guidance." Their faith was strong. She nods. "Faith always makes death heavier," she replies, her tone like silk stretched over sorrow. "The work is endless, but there's comfort in its constancy." You can sense how both gods find meaning in this rhythm. Together, they embody the rule that keeps the cosmos from unraveling. For everything born, something must fade. For everything that fades, something must awaken. A quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks believed that Persephone's torchlight wasn't fire at all. It was made from the pale glow of underworld fungi. Yes, literal ghost mushrooms. In certain caves across Greece, these bioluminescent fungi really do exist, glowing faintly blue-green in the dark. Imagine Persephone striding through eternity with a fungal lantern, eco-friendly queen of the dead. You follow as the day progresses, deeper into the bureaucratic heart of the underworld. There's a certain irony here. Mortals picture death as chaotic, yet it's probably the most efficiently run department in all existence. The judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, sit at their marble benches, reviewing cases like divine auditors. Each soul stands before them, recounting their life, their regrets, their excuses. Some plead. Others simply sigh, ready for whatever comes next. Hades listens but doesn't interfere. His role is broader. He ensures fairness, balance, the steady motion of fate's machinery. Persephone occasionally leans over, whispering to a judge or touching a trembling shade's shoulder. You can tell she believes mercy and order aren't opposites. They're just two sides of the same coin. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks genuinely feared Hades or merely respected him. Unlike the fiery demons of later myths, he wasn't evil. He was inevitable. A ruler, not a tyrant. The living offered sacrifices not to appease cruelty, but to honor the order he maintained. Modern scholars still debate whether his image as grim or gentle came first, or if both were always true. Later, when the tide of new souls slows, the court grows quiet. You watch Persephone slip away to the gardens again, her private refuge. Yes, gardens, here, in the land of the dead. You might expect nothing but dust and bone, yet under her care, strange life thrives. Silver moss creeps along the basalt walls. Pale poppies bloom with translucent petals that catch the faint light like spun glass. A black willow tree stretches across the ceiling, its roots drinking from the sticks itself. She touches each flower as she passes. They don't need sunlight, she explains, sensing your curiosity. Only memory. You wonder if she means that literally. Perhaps these plants grow from forgotten dreams or lost hopes, the emotional compost of humanity. Hades finds her there, and for once he smiles. It's the faintest curve, barely visible beneath the shadow of his hood, but it softens him entirely. The poets would envy this, he says. She shrugs. Let them. They write about life. We cultivate what comes after. The humor lands gently, like a sigh. Even the shades who tend her garden, the quietest, kindest ones, seem to pause, the faintest echo of laughter rippling through them. Another mainstream fact. The Greeks genuinely envisioned the underworld as fertile in its own way. The same soil that nourished crops above was believed to feed spirits below. Offerings of grain or honey poured into the earth weren't just symbolic. They were literal bridges between worlds. As you watch, Persephone gathers a single pomegranate from a crystal dish. It's identical to the one she ate long ago. But now, she bites into it deliberately, choice, not consequence. The juice stains her lips dark as wine. Still sweet, she murmurs. But the flavor changes every season. Hades takes one as well. You half expect him to crack a joke about antioxidants. Instead, he just eats silently, gaze distant. Perhaps even gods find comfort in repetition. Historians still argue whether the number of seeds Persephone ate, 6 in most versions, was meant to symbolize months, planets, or something deeper. Some say it was simply the number of pomegranate chambers the ancients counted. Others insist it represented the phases of transition: life, death, return, renewal, decay, and rest. 6 turns in the eternal cycle. The torchlight dims, and somewhere in the distance, Sharon hums again, ushering another group across. You realize that while the world above calls this winter, down here, it's the season of thriving. Souls arrive like seeds in the soil, each waiting to germinate into memory. Persephone glances toward you, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of her torch. Nothing really dies, she says softly. Everything just learns to sleep differently. And somehow, that's both comforting and terrifying. The hall falls into its familiar hush again. You sense that this peace, this equilibrium, isn't permanent. It never is. But for now, the gods of the underworld rest easy, their dominion secure, their rhythm unbroken. Above, frost thickens. Below, the roots hum. And you, somewhere in between, start to feel that strange, drowsy pull, the same one that ties the living to the dead, the waking to the dreaming. You wake, if waking even means anything here, to the sound of the river Styx murmuring in the distance. The underworld doesn't have mornings or evenings, but something shifts in the air, a slow pulse that feels like dawn trying to remember itself. Hades is already at work. Persephone, too. There's a calm energy flowing through the realm, like the hush before a symphony begins. You follow Hades as he walks down the long, echoing hall toward the vaults of the forgotten, places where memories themselves are stored like relics. You pass columns carved with names that have no voices left to speak them, and walls etched with scenes mortals never saw, battles that never made it into history, lovers who never had songs written for them. A mainstream historical fact. The Greeks believed memory was sacred. The goddess Mnemosyne, mother of the Muses, was said to dwell near the underworld. Some Orphic initiates even drank from her spring to remember their true divine nature after death, instead of forgetting it in the river Lethe. Memory, to them, was power. Hades stops before a great obsidian door. His hand brushes the surface, and the door breathes open, literally exhales, a gust of cold air that smells faintly of stone and lavender. Inside is a hall full of whispering echoes. This is where the memories of the dead gather. Laughter, grief, unfinished sentences, the scent of rain on wedding days. All preserved, catalogued, flickering like candlelight in glass jars. Persephone joins you, her torch dimmed so as not to disturb the whispers. Every soul leaves something behind, she says softly. It's our task to make sure it's not wasted. You trail her as she moves through the rows, touching the jars one by one. Each touch sends up a glimmer, a child's laughter, a song hummed by an old fisherman, a line from a forgotten play. Some of these, she adds, are too beautiful to vanish. She gestures, and a group of shades drifts forward, the gentlest ones, pale and translucent as mist. Their task is to take these memories and plant them in the fields of asphodel. Yes, plant them. Every recollection becomes a seed that blooms into ghostly white flowers, each one a dream relived in miniature. The fields sway softly, endless and glowing. A quirky tidbit: the real asphodel plant is a tall, ghostly flower that thrives in poor soil and blooms even after fire. Ancient Greeks saw it as the perfect metaphor for the afterlife, beauty surviving in the least likely places. Modern botanists still call it the flower of the dead. Hades doesn't linger long. He's practical after all. Let the poets handle beauty, he mutters. I prefer balance. You suspect he says that mostly to convince himself, because when Persephone turns, her torchlight catches his face, just enough for you to see it, the faintest look of tenderness before he buries it under stoic calm. Historians still argue whether Hades ever truly loved Persephone in the romantic sense, or whether their bond represented cosmic necessity more than affection. But ancient hymns, especially the Orphic ones, paint him as gentler than later myths suggest. Some lines even describe him as the tender-hearted one who receives all souls without scorn. Maybe love, in his world, is just another form of equilibrium. Later, you accompany Persephone to a quiet overlook where the rivers of the underworld converge. There are 5 in total: Styx, Acheron, Lethe, Phlegethon, and Cocytus, each representing a human condition: hatred, sorrow, forgetfulness, fire, and lamentation. From up here, you can see how they wind and merge, forming a glimmering web beneath the cavern's vaulted ceiling. It looks like the nervous system of eternity. Mortals fear these rivers, Persephone says, but they're only reflections. They exist inside everyone already. You tilt your head. You mean we carry the underworld with us? She smiles faintly. Of course. You wouldn't dream otherwise. Her words sink into you like ink in water. The more you think about it, the more it makes sense. The human heart holds all 5 rivers: anger that burns, Phlegethon; sorrow that floods, Acheron; memories we try to forget, Lethe; regret that echoes, Cocytus; and grudges we swear by, Styx. The Greeks didn't just imagine the underworld below them, they lived with it inside. As Persephone speaks, a distant tremor ripples through the cavern. The torches flicker. Hades reappears, his expression sharp, scanning the shadows. Something's wrong. A group of shades rushes in, their forms flickering like candle smoke. A breach, one whispers. A mortal has crossed the veil. Hades sighs, the sound deep as thunder. Another hero. You can practically hear his eyes roll. Yes, mortals have a habit of sneaking in here. Orpheus, Heracles, even Theseus once tried their luck. The living never seem content to let the dead be. Hades gestures for his guards, tall, skeletal figures wrapped in bronze shadow, to spread out. Persephone, however, looks curious rather than alarmed. Sometimes, she says, even the living need to see what waits for them. A mainstream fact. In ancient Greek mystery rites, symbolic journeys to the underworld, called katabasis, were central to spiritual initiation. Participants descended in darkness, confronted death, and emerged reborn. The myth of Hades and Persephone was their guiding map. The disturbance turns out to be harmless, a wandering soul clinging to a half-lived memory. A woman who doesn't realize she's dead, still searching for the child she left behind. Persephone approaches her, calm and patient, whispering something you can't hear. Slowly, the woman's edges soften. She lets go. When she vanishes, a faint shimmer remains. A newborn asphodel blooms where she stood. Hades watches this quietly. "You make mercy look easy," he says. "It isn't," Persephone replies. "But it's necessary." Historians still argue whether Persephone's compassion was ever meant to rival Hades' judgment or complement it. The balance between them, mercy and law, became a foundation for later philosophies about justice itself. Plato even referenced their partnership when describing how truth must temper authority. When the calm returns, Persephone turns back toward her garden. "Everything in this realm," she says, "exists to remind mortals that endings are never single. They fold back into beginnings." You feel the truth of that in your bones. Even the rivers seem to murmur it, the Lethe sighing softly as if agreeing. The air grows thicker now, warmer, like the underworld itself is exhaling in relief. You sense another shift coming soon, the seasons turning, the moment when Persephone must return above. Hades feels it too, though he says nothing. The space between them tightens, subtle but real. And as you watch them walk side by side once more, their torches casting twin halos of light and shadow, you realize the great irony of this tale, that death itself needs companionship, and even darkness must learn tenderness. The air in the underworld begins to change again. You feel at first as a quiet restlessness, like the realm itself holding its breath. The rivers run slower, the torches burn lower, and even the shades seem distracted, as though they can sense something missing before it's gone. Persephone stands at the threshold of her garden, hand resting lightly on a vine that's begun to pale. She doesn't need anyone to tell her what's happening. The cycle is turning again. You can almost taste it in the air, the shift between worlds. Hades feels it too. He appears beside her, silent for a long while. The two of them don't need words anymore. They've repeated this dance too many times. Every look, every small movement, is already understood. A mainstream historical fact, the ancient Greeks didn't view the seasons as mere weather changes. They saw them as the literal rhythm of the cosmos. Persephone's ascent and descent were the mechanism that made the earth live and rest. Her half-year above was spring and summer, her half-year below, autumn and winter. Agriculture itself was a divine heartbeat. Hades finally breaks the silence. "You'll be leaving soon." It's not a question. Persephone nods. "The fields above are stirring. My mother has begun to call again." He closes his eyes briefly, just enough to betray the faintest fatigue. "She calls every year," he says. "And every year, I have to let you go." She turns to face him, her expression neither sorrowful nor joyful, simply resolute. "It's not letting go," she says. "It's remembering the purpose of both worlds." The quiet that follows isn't awkward, it's sacred. You can almost hear the hum of balance settling back into place. A quirky tidbit. In some lesser-known versions of the myth, Hades actually visits Persephone above the earth during her months of sunlight, but disguised as a mortal. There are old village legends from Arcadia describing a mysterious stranger who helped till the fields in spring and vanished before harvest. Locals swore it was the lord of the underworld himself, checking on his half of the bargain. Persephone walks through the great hall one last time before her departure. The shades bow as she passes. Even the judges pause their endless trials, lowering their gazes in reverence. She has become more than a queen to them. She's a reminder that even the dead have something to wait for. You follow as she stops beside the river Styx. The black water ripples faintly, catching the dim light from her torch. She kneels, touching the surface. A faint shimmer spreads outward, and for a moment, the river's darkness turns translucent, revealing reflections of the living world above. Golden fields, ripening olives, sunlight glinting on the sea. She whispers something into the water, a private farewell. You catch only one phrase, "Until the frost returns." Hades watches from a few paces away, arms folded, expression unreadable. When she rises, he offers his hand. It's a simple gesture, but it carries the weight of eternity. "Until the frost," he repeats. She takes it. Historians still argue whether Persephone's yearly departure symbolized sorrow or renewal. Some say Demeter's grief created winter. Others believe it was Persephone's sacrifice, her voluntary return to the underworld, that kept the balance alive. Either way, it's one of the earliest examples in mythology where loss and love are portrayed as necessary companions. The moment comes quietly. Hades summons the chariot again, the same one that carried her down long ago, its wheels whispering against the stone. But this time, there's no abduction, no fear. Persephone steps aboard willingly. Her torch burns steady, its light spilling across the cavern like liquid moonlight. Before she departs, she turns back once more, her eyes catching Hades, and yours. Remember, she says softly, every seed needs darkness before it blooms. You don't realize how much that line will haunt you later. The chariot rises, its hooves clattering on invisible paths. The air folds around it like silk being drawn shut. The last thing you see is the faint blue gleam of her torch vanishing into the ceiling of the world. Silence follows, thick, heavy, absolute. Even the rivers seem to stop moving. Hades stands there for a long while, unmoving. The great hall feels cavernous without her. The flowers she tended wilt almost instantly, petals falling like snow. The torchlight dims to embers. For all his strength, Hades looks tired, a mainstream fact that feels painfully fitting. In Greek art, Hades is often shown holding a bird-headed staff, a symbol of the soul's passage between worlds. Some scholars believe the bird represents Persephone herself, the migratory queen, who always returns. He finally turns and begins to walk, his footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. You follow him out of habit now, more shadow than spectator. The realm adjusts slowly. The shades return to their tasks. The judges resume their verdicts. Cerberus curls up by the gates again, one head snoring softly while another twitches in a dream. Hades stops by his throne, running a hand along the obsidian armrest. She's right, he murmurs, almost to himself. Everything needs its season. He sits, the weight of eternity settling comfortably around him again. The crown of shadow reforms on his head, faintly glowing in the dimness. But beneath the authority, you catch something human, a flicker of melancholy, a tenderness only time could wear smooth. Historians still argue whether this cyclical myth was created to explain nature or to comfort humanity about mortality. Maybe both. Maybe that's why it endures, because deep down, everyone wants to believe that loss is temporary, that every descent carries the promise of return. You drift away from the throne, wandering into the gardens, once more. They're dormant now, but not dead. Beneath the gray soil, you can sense the pulse of life still beating, faint but steady. The roots remember. The earth remembers. Above, in the mortal world, the first buds of spring are already pushing through thawing ground. Demeter smiles again. Farmers lift their faces to the sun. The circle continues. And somewhere between those two realms, between the blooming and the stillness, you realize that maybe the underworld was never about death at all. Maybe it's about patience, about the waiting between endings and beginnings. You wake, or drift, or maybe just continue, to the soft sound of dripping water. It's strange how much quieter the underworld feels without her. The air itself seems denser, like the silence has gained weight. Hades sits alone now, back straight, gaze fixed somewhere past the shadows, as though he's staring through time instead of space. He's not sulking exactly. Gods don't sulk. But even eternity can grow restless. You can sense it in the rhythm of his realm. The torches burn slower. The rivers flow heavier. The air holds its chill a bit too long. He rises eventually and walks toward the deeper vaults of his kingdom, the parts even Persephone rarely visited. You follow, your footsteps swallowed by the dark. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed the underworld had multiple layers, or regions, each serving a different kind of soul. Tartarus, the pit of punishment, lay deepest. Above it stretched Asphodel, the plane of the ordinary dead. And above that, Elysium, the home of heroes and the blessed. Later poets added the Isles of the Blessed, a kind of upgraded paradise for those reincarnated into virtue. Death, apparently, came with a rewards program. Hades descends past all these boundaries, torch in hand. The flame flickers green here, casting light on carvings older than Olympus itself. The walls depict the birth of the world, the titans rising from chaos, the first stars being kindled, the ocean swallowing and releasing continents. You realize he's not just ruler of the dead, he's the last witness of creation. He stops before a massive gate, larger than any you've seen. It's sealed with chains that pulse faintly, as if alive. The forgotten pit, he says. Even I don't open it unless I must. A sound trembles through the floor, low, rhythmic, almost like breathing. You feel it in your ribs. A quirky tidbit. Some ancient Greek philosophers believed Tartarus wasn't just a prison, but a cosmic furnace, the place where the universe's excess heat and energy were stored. In a way, they'd stumbled onto an early concept of thermodynamics, 2,000 years before science caught up. Hades rests his hand on the gate. It's not evil down there, he murmurs. Just leftover chaos. The universe keeps a cellar for things that don't fit anymore. You can't help thinking how lonely that sounds. Even chaos needs a place to go when it's tired. He leaves the gate unopened and moves on, torchlight stretching long shadows down the hall. When he reaches the end, you see something unexpected, a small alcove carved into the stone, lined with delicate objects. A garland of dried flowers, a handful of grain, a small clay figure shaped like a dove. Persephone's things. He kneels briefly, adjusts one of the flowers, and exhales. It's not a sigh, exactly, more like a release. She says the same thing every year. He mutters. It's only for a while. You realize this ritual isn't for show. It's how he marks time, without the living sun or the turning sky. He uses absence to measure eternity. Historians still argue whether Hades' domain was meant as punishment or preservation. Some ancient sources describe him as merciful, keeping souls safe from decay. Others paint him as cold and distant. But perhaps both are true. Preservation is a kind of stillness, and stillness can look like sorrow to those who live in motion. Back in the upper halls, Hades resumes his duties. A group of newly arrived souls awaits judgment, their faces uncertain, shimmering at the edges. He gestures for them to step forward. His tone is steady, almost gentle. Tell me what you remember, he says. Each soul speaks, brief flashes of mortal life. One tells of battles fought and regrets left unspoken. Another recounts a love lost to time. When they finish, Hades nods to the judges. Balance them, he orders simply. You watch as the souls disperse, each fading toward their proper realm. It's efficient, methodical, almost tender in its own way. A mainstream fact, inscriptions from Greek tombs often included phrases like, "Do not disturb my bones. Hades will guard me." For many, his name wasn't one of terror but of reassurance. Death had a keeper, and the keeper was just. Still, when the hall empties, the quiet returns, heavier now, like fog pressing in. You sense his thoughts turning inward again. When mortals forget me, he says suddenly, they imagine death as chaos. When they remember me, they imagine peace. Neither is true. You tilt your head. Then what is death really? He considers this, eyes distant. It's translation, he says finally. The same story told in another language. The phrase lingers in your mind long after he walks away. Later, you drift through the quiet gardens, Persephone's garden, though she's far above now. The wilted plants still hum faintly with her energy. You kneel beside one of the asphodel blooms, brushing the petals. They feel cool, like breath on glass. You realize the flowers haven't died. They're waiting, conserving. Maybe that's what eternity really is, a state of patient waiting. A quirky tidbit. In parts of rural Greece, people still leave bread and pomegranate seeds on graves during the cold months. They call it feeding the quiet ones. Old habits die hard, literally. Time, if time exists here, moves slowly. Eventually, the faintest echo rises from above, the first tremor of spring. It's not sound so much as vibration, carried through stone and air and memory. Hades feels it instantly. He lifts his head, and the faintest light passes across his eyes. He doesn't smile, but the corners of his mouth soften. She's coming, he murmurs. The underworld stirs. Rivers quicken. The torches burn higher. Even Cerberus rises from his nap, sniffing the air like he can smell sunlight through solid rock. The shades sense it too. They whisper and drift faster, like wind catching dry leaves. For a god who has ruled eternity, Hades suddenly looks almost nervous. It's oddly human, that tiny flicker of anticipation before reunion. Historians still argue whether Persephone's return was ever meant to symbolize redemption or merely inevitability. But in that moment, as you stand beside the god of death, waiting for life to return, you realize both might be true. The ceiling of the underworld glows faintly, the thin boundary between death and life shimmering like a stretched curtain. A soft warmth seeps through. The sound of distant hooves echoes again, and before she even appears, you can feel it. The temperature rising, the air loosening, the faint scent of new blossoms threading through the gloom. Persephone is returning, and the realm exhales. The moment she steps across the threshold, it's like the first sunrise after a century of eclipse. You almost forget what color looks like until Persephone brings it back. The torches burn gold instead of blue. The air ripples with warmth. Even the whispering souls hush, like an orchestra waiting for the conductor's downbeat. She doesn't rush into Hades' arms. That's not their way. Instead, she pauses, looks around the throne room, and lets a small, knowing smile appear. "You kept the flowers alive," she says softly. Hades inclines his head, tone perfectly deadpan. "Mostly. A few tried to unionize." The underworld laughs, genuinely, this time. The walls seem to breathe. You feel yourself smiling, too, in that sleepy, relieved way you might when a long storm finally ends. It's strange how quickly the world rebuilds itself around her. The rivers brighten, the stones shed their frost, and the faint hum of unseen life returns. She's not a guest here anymore. She's half of its pulse. A mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek agricultural rituals, Persephone's return marked the sowing season. Farmers would scatter seeds while invoking her name, believing her emergence guaranteed fertility for their crops. Her myth wasn't just story, it was calendar. You follow the pair as they stroll through the shadowed halls. No guards, no ceremony. Just two deities who've done this reunion enough times to skip the formalities. She touches the wall carvings as she walks, her fingers leaving faint trails of brightness. "So," she says lightly, "how many lost poets this time?" 7, Hades answers. 6 complained about the lighting. It's easy to forget these two could unmake the cosmos if they wanted. They bicker like an old couple running a quiet bed and breakfast for the eternally doomed. Still, beneath the humor, there's gravity. You sense the rhythm between them, winter and spring, loss and return, silence and song. It's not love in the storybook sense. It's older, heavier, something built from patience instead of passion. They pause at the asphodel fields, where the ordinary souls wander. Persephone kneels beside a spirit, an old woman clutching a faded bundle of herbs. "You were a healer," she says. The shade nods, eyes wide with recognition. Persephone smiles. "Then heal even here." And with that, the herbs in the woman's hands shimmer back into color. She begins tending to other souls, offering them small sprigs that smell faintly of time and sun. A quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found small terracotta figurines buried in ancient Greek fields, tiny women holding grain or flowers. Scholars think these represented Persephone herself, planted as blessings. So yes, people literally grew goddess figurines for luck. As you walk on, Persephone's attention catches on the far distance, a faint shimmer in the horizon. It looks almost like dawn, though the underworld has no sky. She turns to Hades. "You've been keeping something from me." His expression gives away nothing, but you feel the tension shift. "You'll see," he says simply. You follow as they approach a vast open space, the very heart of the realm. Here, the river Lethe curves like a silver ribbon, winding through a meadow of translucent grass. This is new. Last time you were here, it was barren. Persephone kneels beside the water. "You moved it," she whispers. Hades shrugs. "The dead were restless. I thought a garden might help." The Lethe, river of forgetfulness, flows slow and luminous. Souls kneel to drink, each sip erasing a sliver of their mortal pain. You feel the peace radiate off them, a kind of cosmic mercy. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greeks viewed memory loss as tragedy or liberation. Some sources claim the lethe was punishment, an eternal fading. Others describe it as a gift, freedom from the weight of earthly sorrow. Watching Persephone now, you suspect it's both. She dips her fingers into the river and touches her forehead, murmuring something under her breath. The light around her brightens, soft but fierce, like morning through fog. For a moment, Hades just watches her. You catch it, the smallest flicker of awe, maybe even pride. "You always bring too much life down here," he mutters, though his voice sounds more fond than reproachful. She looks at him sideways. "And you never stop pretending you don't need it." It's an old dance, equal parts affection and philosophy. Two eternal beings orbiting each other's gravity. You sense the unspoken truth. Neither of them works without the other. A mainstream historical fact. Roman writers later renamed these gods Pluto and Persephone, softening their imagery into metaphors of wealth and renewal. Pluto's name literally meant the giver of riches, because everything valuable, from gold to grain, came from below. Death and abundance, bound together. Persephone walks to the edge of the lethe and gestures. The river shifts, splitting into smaller channels that spread through the plain like veins. "Let them remember just enough," she says quietly. "Enough to know they lived." The current shimmers, obeying her. It's the closest thing to grace you've seen in this dark place. Hades watches, then sighs, one of those long, resigned sighs that mean fine. You win again. "Every year," he says, "you remake what I preserve." "And every year," she replies, "you preserve what I remake." The silence that follows is thick but tender. You almost hate to break it. A quirky tidbit: in certain Orphic mystery cults, initiates were buried with tiny gold tablets inscribed with instructions for the afterlife. One line reads, "Do not drink from lethe. Drink from Mnemosyne, the spring of memory." The idea was to escape rebirth entirely, to remember enough to transcend. Mortals, it seems, always wanted loopholes. As the couple turns back toward the palace, the underworld feels balanced again. Not bright, not joyful, but whole. The souls drift peacefully, the rivers hum in tune, and even Cerberus wags one tail lazily. Persephone glances upward, sensing the pull of spring in the mortal world. "They'll start planting soon," she murmurs. Hades nods. "And they'll start dying again soon after." She laughs, a clear, ringing sound that cuts through the shadows. "Then I'll see them again." You think about that. The eternal cycle, equal parts tragic and tender. Death isn't an ending, it's an annual visit. The torches burn steady now, no longer morning. Persephone reaches for Hades' hand. He hesitates for just a second, then takes it. The glow around them softens the room, and you can almost feel warmth seep into the stones. For once, the underworld doesn't feel like a tomb. It feels like a heartbeat. You find yourself drifting after them, past the fields and rivers, through corridors that twist like veins beneath the world. The underworld hums again, a low vibration of life returning. Persephone's presence has changed everything, like someone turned up the contrast after months of grayscale. Hades, for his part, walks in silence, hands clasped behind his back. The faintest trace of a smile keeps tugging at the corners of his mouth. You wonder if this is what passes for bliss in a god who measures joy in geological time. They pass by a group of shades gathered near a fountain. Persephone stops. The fountain isn't like anything you've seen before. It's carved from black marble, but the water inside glows faintly blue, like trapped lightning. "What's this?" she asks. Hades glances at it, almost sheepishly. "A project. Hermes said the newly dead were getting restless. Too many memories, not enough purpose. So I built them a wishing pool." She laughs. "A wishing pool? You?" He shrugs. "It's statistically unwise to let eternity get boring." The shades step forward, murmuring their old desires, to see the sun again, to hear their children's laughter, to finish a song. The water ripples each time, showing brief flashes, echoes, not realities, but enough to make the shades sigh in something like peace. A mainstream historical fact. Some ancient Greeks left coins not just for sharing but for offerings to the chthonic gods, Persephone, Hecate, or the Furies, hoping they'd intercede on behalf of a soul. The afterlife wasn't one stop. It was bureaucracy, powered by bribes. You lean over the fountain. Your reflection flickers strangely, alive and not alive, overlapping realities like wet paint. You wonder, briefly, what you'd wish for. Sleep, maybe. Or a time that doesn't feel like a countdown. Persephone watches you, and for a fleeting second, you suspect she knows exactly what you're thinking. Even the living come here in dreams, she says softly. That's how they practice dying. A chill runs down your spine, though her tone is kind. Hades catches your eye, adding dryly, "Don't take it personally. Everyone ends up here eventually. Some just send postcards first." That's joke number 2. Though you're starting to think the underworld has its own kind of humor, the kind that laughs to keep the silence company. As they continue walking, Persephone gestures toward a row of enormous pillars lining the next hall. Each one is inscribed with names, thousands upon thousands. "These are new," she says. Hades nods. "The mortals keep inventing more ways to remember their dead. I thought I'd return the favor." You move closer. The names shimmer faintly, whispering in dozens of languages, some ancient, some yet to exist. You realize this hall doesn't track the past. It's prophecy, a catalog of all who will die. The air smells faintly of ink and dust. Historians still argue whether the Greeks believed fate could be rewritten. Some myths say even the gods bowed to destiny. Others hint that clever mortals could bend it, like Odysseus sneaking past death's domain. Here, in this room of names, it feels like both are true. Fate is written, but written in pencil. Persephone traces one of the glowing names with her fingertip. "They always think they're ready," she murmurs, "but they never are." Hades replies, "Neither were we." That stops her for a beat. The silence between them hums, layered with centuries of unspoken memory. To break it, she gestures toward a corridor branching off from the hall. "Come," she says, smiling faintly. "Let's see if your Furies have redecorated again." The Furies, Alecto, Megaera, and Tisiphone, greet them at the entrance of their domain with the kind of energy you'd expect from beings whose hobbies include vengeance and paperwork. Alecto bows dramatically. "Your Majesties," she says, "welcome to our humble pit." Persephone raises an eyebrow. "This humble pit smells like lavender." Megaera beams proudly. "We're trying aromatherapy. Calms the damned." Hades stares, expression unreadable. "You're torturing them with scented candles?" "Balance," Megaera says sweetly. "Eternal suffering, but make it cozy." Even Cerberus huffs a sound that might be a snicker. A quirky tidbit. In later Roman adaptations, the Furies were renamed Diary and associated with moral guilt rather than divine punishment. Some household shrines even invoke them as protectors of justice. Ancient home security systems, powered by wrath. The Furies lead the trio deeper inside. The halls echo with distant cries, not of agony, exactly, but catharsis. Persephone pauses beside a soul weeping into her hands. "She's repenting," Megaera explains. "For envy." Persephone nods. Then she's already halfway out. She waves her hand, and the woman's chains dissolve into dust. The soul looks up, astonished. "Go," Persephone whispers. "Rest." The Furies exchange glances, torn between admiration and annoyance. "You're making us look soft," Alecto mutters. Persephone smiles. "Balance, remember?" Hades, standing slightly apart, watches all this quietly. You can tell he's proud, though he'd rather be buried again than admit it. "You've improved my kingdom," he says finally. "You've kept it alive," she answers. They stand together for a moment, the queen and king of the dead, surrounded by flickering torchlight and whispering souls. And somehow, it feels less like death and more like equilibrium, like every sorrow has finally found its echo. Historians still argue whether the myth of Persephone and Hades was ever meant as romance or as explanation for suffering. Maybe both. The world needed a reason for things to die, and a promise they'd return. The Furies bow as the pair turn to leave, muttering something about needing more lavender oil. You follow them out, your footsteps echoing softly. The underworld feels oddly gentle now, almost domestic. As you reach the main hall again, Persephone glances at you. "You've seen much tonight," she says. "Does it frighten you?" You think about it. The darkness doesn't feel hostile anymore, just infinite, like deep sleep. "No," you answer. "It feels honest." Hades gives a small, approving nod. That's all Death ever wanted to be. And as they walk ahead, side by side, you can feel it, the slow, rhythmic pulse of the underworld, like a heartbeat deep beneath the world's crust. Not cold, not cruel, just necessary. You yawn, feeling drowsy, as if the darkness itself is tucking you in. You drift further with them, half awake, half lost, through the tunnels that spiral around the heart of the world. The air here hums differently, warm and mineral, like the breath of some sleeping mountain. Every surface glows faintly from within, the way embers pulse before dying. Persephone walks a little ahead, touching the walls as though listening for something. "They're changing," she murmurs. Hades glances up. "The roots?" She nods. "The ones that reach the mortal world. They're growing faster this year." You realize she's talking about the roots of the great world tree, the unseen veins that tie life to death, topsoil to shadow. The myth never named it, but it's here, alive beneath everything, feeding both realms like a heartbeat shared between two bodies. A mainstream historical fact. Greek poets called these veins narai, sacred conduits that carried the essence of life downward and the whispers of the dead upward. Offerings poured on graves were believed to travel through them straight to the underworld, like divine plumbing. You trail your hand along one of the roots. It's warm, faintly sticky with sap that smells like pomegranate and smoke. It pulses once, twice, like something answering back. Persephone closes her eyes. They're whispering again. "What do they say?" you ask, before remembering you're talking to the literal goddess of rebirth. Her eyes open slowly, pupils bright as molten gold. They're asking why the mortals forget so easily. Hades gives a quiet snort. Because remembering hurts. Forgetting sells better. You can't argue with that. Even the shades here seem quieter, content to fade. Maybe oblivion is mercy in small doses. A quirky tidbit. In rural Greek villages, people once placed olive oil lamps on family graves, not just to honor ancestors, but to feed the roots. The light symbolized life's descent into the soil, a literal night light for the underworld. The three of you reach a vast cavern, circular and domed like the inside of a bell. At its center stands something that shouldn't exist underground. A tree, enormous and pale, its branches glowing with faint silver light. Its roots vanish deep into cracks that seem bottomless. Persephone steps forward, awe softening her voice. She's still growing. You whisper. "The first seed," she says. "Gaia planted it after the war of the Titans. Everything living, above and below, grew from this." You look up, following the branches. You can just make out small, suspended orbs hanging from the tips, souls, luminous and slow-turning like fruit on invisible strings. Each one hums with faint sound, like the memory of laughter. A mainstream historical fact. The Orphic texts describe the soul as a spark of divine light trapped in matter. Death, to them, was the soul's harvest, returning to its tree, waiting to ripen again for rebirth. Hades stands beside the trunk, resting a hand on its bark. The surface ripples slightly, and you realize it's not wood but something more fluid, more alive. He closes his eyes briefly, listening. "Too many sparks," he murmurs. "Too few bodies ready to bear them." Persephone's tone softens. "Then hold them gently until they can return." It's strange, watching death and life speak to each other in the language of gardeners. Historians still argue whether the Greeks believed in reincarnation. Some sects, Pythagoreans, Orphics, insisted the soul cycled endlessly until purified. Others thought it dissolved into shadow forever. But here, standing beneath the glowing tree, it feels undeniable. Everything circles back eventually. Persephone reaches for one of the light orbs. It trembles, glowing brighter under her touch. "This one remembers," she says quietly. "A song about wind through pine trees." She closes her hand around it and lets it drift upward, rising through cracks that pulse faintly with daylight. Somewhere above, in the mortal world, a child will take its first breath, and somewhere nearby, a breeze will move through pine needles. You shiver. The symmetry is too perfect to be coincidence. Hades watches without comment, but his expression has softened. You always send them back singing, he says. Better than silence, she replies. For a while, you all just stand there, listening to the faint music of the tree, the overlapping hum of millions of memories, overlapping lives. It's beautiful and it's dizzying. You feel like if you listen too long, you might start remembering other lives of your own. A quirky tidbit. Some ancient priests of Delphi swore that newborns who cried unusually softly were close listeners, souls that had overheard the music of the underworld tree before birth. Parents took it as a good omen, though you can imagine it made bedtime interesting. The longer you stay, the heavier your eyelids feel. There's something hypnotic about this rhythm, the way each soul hums slightly out of sync, like wind chimes in a slow breeze. Even Hades' voice lowers to a near whisper. Every cycle we begin again, he says. Not because we must, but because stopping would be worse. You think of the endless migrations of life and death, the grain sprouting from rotted soil, the stars burning and collapsing. Maybe that's all this is. The cosmos learning to breathe in and out forever. Persephone looks toward you one last time, before turning to go. When you wake, she says softly, remember that even endings have roots. You nod, too sleepy to speak. The glow around the tree dims slightly as the pair walk away, the branches swaying in rhythm with their fading steps. The air smells of earth after rain. You follow them out of the cavern, back toward the palace. The corridors feel warmer now, and you realize the trees hum still echoes faintly in your ears. For the first time since entering this realm, you don't feel afraid of the dark. You feel grateful for it. When you return to the palace, the torches are burning low, flickering like sleepy eyes. Persephone moves with that quiet energy of someone who knows the night has done enough work for one cycle. Hades walks beside her, slower than usual, as though reluctant to disturb the calm that's finally settled over his realm. The corridors seem to sigh around you, softer now, less echo, more breath. The shades have retreated to their resting places. The Furies have gone silent, and even the Lethe murmurs at a lower volume. Persephone glances toward the ceiling, sensing something above. They've started blooming, she murmurs. The mortal's fields, you ask? She nods. I can feel it through the roots. The earth is warm again. A mainstream historical fact. In Eleusis, just outside Athens, the mysteries of Demeter and Persephone were held every year to mark this very moment, the return of life to the soil. The rituals were secret, but historians know initiates walked in torchlit processions, drank a sacred barley potion, and symbolically descended before celebrating rebirth. It was less religion and more rehearsal for eternity. You picture it, the flicker of torches, the slow chant, the way people must have held each other's hands to keep from tripping into the dark. Maybe they weren't just reenacting Persephone's return. Maybe they were trying to feel it. Hades pours 2 cups of something that looks like molten obsidian. For the queen, he says dryly, handing her one. Persephone sniffs it, grimaces, and sips anyway. Still terrible. He smirks faintly. Still divine. You take in the scene, the faint glow from the rivers outside the window, the long shadows stretching across the floor, the steady hum of a world that's learned to balance absence and abundance. Hades looks up suddenly. She's calling, he says. You know who he means. Demeter. The air shifts, temperature rising a few degrees, as though the thought of the harvest goddess herself ripples through every layer of the world. Persephone's shoulders tense for just a moment, then relax. I'll go soon, she says. Hades' tone stays even, but you hear the centuries of repetition behind it. You always do. She steps closer, and I always come back. They stand that way for a moment, 2 eternities, leaning just close enough to defy distance. You think of their story again, and for the first time it doesn't feel tragic. It feels inevitable, like the tides or breathing. You can't have one without the other. A quirky tidbit. In some older, pre-Olympian versions of the myth, Persephone wasn't abducted at all. She chose to descend. Archaeologists found vase paintings that show her calmly stepping into Hades' chariot, holding a torch, not weeping but resolute. Later storytellers softened the narrative, but the earlier art suggests she was never a victim. She was balance made flesh. As they stand in silence, you feel the underworld beginning to shift again. The air cools, the torches dim. Even the great wall seemed to pull inward, preparing for another cycle of quiet. Persephone's season below is ending, and the world above will wake soon. Historians still argue whether Hades truly felt love or whether his bond with her was simply cosmic function, gravity meeting orbit. But here, watching him now, you realize those two ideas aren't enemies. They're synonyms in divine language. Persephone turns to you, smiling softly. You've seen much for a mortal dreamer. You blink. Dreamer. She chuckles. How else could you stand here? You're not dead, and yet you wander my halls. You look down at your hands, suddenly unsure whether they're solid or made of mist. Then this isn't real. It's real enough, she says. Everything you remember changes you. That sounds suspiciously like something the Oracle of Delphi would have said after too much incense. You try to reply, but the air feels thicker now, like you're walking through the slow breath of the earth itself. Hades glances toward the great gates. The road is opening. You should go before it closes. But I don't know the way, you protest. He gestures toward the far hall, where the darkness has thinned into a faint golden shimmer, the same kind of light you saw when Persephone first returned. Follow the glow, he says. It always leads out. You hesitate. Will I remember any of this? Historians still argue about that. He deadpans. Then, with a rare trace of warmth, but some dreams stick harder than truth. You manage a small smile. Thank you. Persephone gives a faint nod. Tell them we are not what they fear. Tell them we are what keeps things turning. As you turn to leave, the underworld's hum seems to rise in pitch. The air trembles, and you realize this isn't just sound, it's movement. The whole realm is rotating, gently, like a massive wheel. Life above, death below, both part of the same spin. A quirky tidbit. Early philosophers like Heraclitus believed the universe itself was a living fire, constantly consuming and renewing itself. Life and death are one, he wrote, like the river and the sea. Maybe you dreamed this place too. You walk toward the light, your footsteps echoing softly. Behind you, Hades and Persephone stand side by side at the threshold of their realm. She glowing faintly with spring's promise, he steady as the roots that hold the world in place. For a moment, the light and shadow merge perfectly, and you see them not as opposites, but as halves of one shape, two sides of a cosmic coin flipping endlessly through eternity. Your vision blurs. The golden shimmer widens until it swallows everything. You feel yourself lifting, lighter with every breath, like dust caught in an updraft. You hear Persephone's voice one last time, calm and certain. Wake remembering. Then the light folds over you completely, and the underworld vanishes like a dream you half promise yourself you'll write down later. You open your eyes, or maybe just the idea of eyes, and realize you're somewhere in between. The air feels half warm, half cool, like dawn hesitating before committing to day. The golden shimmer fades behind you, but a thread of it still clings to your chest, pulsing faintly. The ground beneath your feet is no longer obsidian or ash. It's soil, dark, damp, rich with the smell of roots remembering rain. You've made it back to the upper world. Birds stir in unseen branches. You can't tell if they're real or symbolic, but they sing like they've been practicing for months. The landscape unfurls slowly, a field half-tilled, half-wild, with patches of snow melting into green shoots. You realize this must be the edge of spring, the exact moment when Persephone crosses between worlds. It feels strange to stand here after so long below. Everything above is too loud, not in noise, but in life. You can hear sap moving, worms twisting, clouds shifting. You even swear you can hear wheat thinking about growing. In myth, this border was sacred. Ancient Greeks called it the Onodos, the rising, the place where Persephone's foot first touched sunlight each year. Historians still argue whether the ritual spot was a literal cave near Eleusis or a symbolic doorway within the human mind. Either way, they say initiates who experienced the mystery were never afraid of death again. You stand at that threshold now, caught between soil and sky, thinking maybe those initiates were onto something. A breeze brushes your face, carrying the faintest whisper of her voice. Persephone. You can't make out the words, but it sounds like a lullaby sung through miles of earth. Then another voice joins it, lower, steady, unmistakable. Hades. He doesn't speak in words either, but in weight and gravity. Together, they hum through you like two notes played on one string. You laugh softly. You two never quit, do you? The field glimmers in response, which you take as a yes. As you walk, you pass remnants of what once were altars. Stone platforms overgrown with vines, half-buried jars, and little mounds of burned offerings. A quirky tidbit. Some Greek farmers left the first bite of every harvest meal for Persephone, even centuries after her official cult faded. One archaeologist found bowls of pomegranate seeds, carefully placed in graves as late as the 3rd century CE. Proof that people still believed the underworld queen accepted dinner invitations from the dead. The sun rises a little higher, but gently, like it knows it's intruding on a bedtime story. You feel warmth seeping into your bones, and it's not unpleasant, just different. The kind of warmth that makes you want to stretch, not wake. As you walk farther, a figure appears ahead, a woman in rough linen, her hair crowned with barley stalks. Demeter. Her presence is immense but not overwhelming, like the earth itself standing upright. She turns, her eyes the same green as the first sprouts, poking through frost. You've been below, she says simply. You know it, long enough to see why she goes. Her gaze softens. Then you understand why she must return. You do. It's not just about loss or love. It's rhythm. Without descent, ascent means nothing. Without darkness, there's no hunger for dawn. Demeter kneels and presses her palm to the soil. Instantly, life stirs. Shoots of wheat, tiny and trembling, push upward. She smiles faintly. This is the sound of forgiveness, she murmurs. You can almost hear it. The rustle of growth, the low hum of things choosing to live again. Will she come soon? You ask. She already has, Demeter says, and you realize the faint hum you feel in your chest is the same rhythm moving through the ground. Somewhere far below, Persephone is already rising, her footsteps sending waves of renewal upward. Historians still argue whether the myth was ever meant to be literal. Was it a coded explanation for agriculture's seasonal cycles? A psychological metaphor for human resilience? Or maybe, as some fringe theorists like to suggest, it was a memory of an ancient ecological event, volcanic winter giving way to fertility once more. Whatever the origin, the story works because it feels right. It doesn't need to prove itself. You glance back toward the horizon, where the underworld's shimmer has vanished. Part of you misses the cool quiet, the echo of the Lethe, even the grumpy gossip of the Furies. Funny how quickly the dark can feel like home once you stop fearing it. But up here, the light has its own kind of tenderness. It's not blinding, it's patient. The sun's warmth feels like a blanket fresh from the dryer. The breeze carries that scent of soil and promise. A rabbit darts by, stopping long enough to give you a look that clearly says, "You don't belong here," before disappearing into the brush. You chuckle. Yeah, I'm starting to notice. As you wander farther, you find a stream winding through the field. Its water glints like glass, and when you kneel to look closer, you see not your reflection but flashes of both realms, flowers above, roots below, worlds intertwined. You touch the surface, and ripples spread outward, as if the two layers are greeting each other. You take a drink. The taste is cool, earthy, slightly metallic, like a memory half-buried. In the distance, temple bells ring faintly. Maybe in Eleusis, maybe somewhere else entirely. You realize they're not calling for worship, they're calling for rhythm. The endless, reassuring back and forth of return. You breathe deeply. For the first time since entering the story, you feel both alive and resting, both things at once. A leaf falls near your hand, curling as it lands. You pick it up and notice tiny veins pulsing faintly with light, life running through even the smallest forgotten thing. You let it go, and the wind carries it upward. Somewhere behind you, Demeter hums a low tune that sounds suspiciously like Persephone's laughter. You realize they never stopped being connected. They just learned to share her. You glance up. The sky is bluer now, impossibly clear, like it's just been washed. Maybe it has. You take another step toward the horizon, the golden thread in your chest, still glowing softly. It doesn't feel like an exit. It feels like a homecoming you didn't expect. If the underworld taught you patience, the upper world teaches you mercy. Both, it seems, are just forms of sleep and waking. As the light folds around you, you realize the story isn't ending. It's looping, just like the cycle that keeps gods, mortals, and bedtime tales turning forever. The path ahead winds toward a ridge, soft underfoot, and speckled with the first wildflowers of the year. Each petal seems to glow faintly in the early light, as if they remember where they came from, deep beneath the soil, in the quiet dark that shaped them. You follow the ridge upward, not rushing, just drifting in that half-dream state where walking feels like floating. The higher you climb, the more the world spreads out below you. You can see the valley that Demeter has blessed, a quilt of greens and golds still waking from winter. In the far distance, the sea flickers like polished obsidian, a faint mirror to the underworld's rivers. You pause to breathe, and for a heartbeat, everything goes still. No wind, no birds, just the pulse of the earth itself. It's then that you realize something important. Hades' realm wasn't beneath you. It was within you. Every descent you've ever made to grief, to silence, to rest, was a visit to him. Every return, a nod to her. That's the true genius of Greek myth. It externalizes the internal. The gods weren't out there, throwing lightning and ruling the tides. They were metaphors wearing fancy sandals. A mainstream historical fact. When Plato wrote about the underworld, he wasn't describing geography, but psychology. He imagined souls passing through rivers that erased memory or amplified wisdom, symbolizing how humans learn, or fail to, from each life. Modern scholars often call it the first philosophy of reincarnation, though Plato might have called it a polite way of saying, try again, but better. You grin at the thought. Try again, but better would look great on an afterlife motivational poster. As you keep walking, a soft hum rises in the air. At first, you think it's the wind in the grass, but no, it's a tune. Familiar, looping, hypnotic. It's the song Persephone hummed in the underworld, the one that kept Cerberus calm and the shades from despair. Somehow it's found its way up here, echoing through the hills like a memory with good acoustics. The sound draws you toward a small grove of cypress trees. Between them, you find a stone bench covered in moss. You sit, and for the first time, the story feels like it's sitting with you. You think about everyone you've met along the way. The shades wandering by the rivers, Hecate at the crossroads, Hermes pretending not to care, Persephone glowing softly in the dark, and Hades himself, stoic as gravity. None of them seem evil or good anymore. They're just inevitable. Forces that keep the universe from falling asleep on one side. A quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks sometimes placed a coin under a corpse's tongue as payment for Charon, the ferryman. But archaeologists have found graves with up to 6 coins, suggesting some families were either terrible with math or very concerned about surge pricing in the afterlife. You can't help but chuckle at that. Better to overpay than underpay the guy who rows you across death. You mutter. The air shifts again. You sense a presence, familiar, patient, slightly amused. Hades himself, but lighter this time, less shadow, more memory. Still wandering? He asks, voice like smooth basalt. Still learning, you reply. He nods, faint approval in his tone. That's all any of us do. Even gods get it wrong sometimes. You tilt your head. Even you. Especially me. He smirks. Ask Persephone. You laugh, and for a fleeting second, it feels like you're back in the throne room. The warmth of obsidian torches, the echo of quiet jokes between 2 immortals who've been married since metaphor was invented. Hades looks out toward the horizon. Do you know what mortals get wrong about us? You shake your head. They think we're separate. Life and death. Light and dark. But they're the same river. Different shores. You pause, letting that sink in. So when people fear dying, they're just fearing the turn, he finishes. The moment before the light changes. You can't stop it, but you can learn to sway with it. That phrase lands somewhere deep in your chest, alongside the golden thread that's still faintly glowing. Historians still argue whether Hades' reputation as a grim ruler was propaganda by Zeus's worshippers, who wanted to emphasize the sky's supremacy over the soil. But the deeper you think about it, the more obvious it seems. Of all the gods, Hades was the only one who kept his promises. He never lied, never cheated, never broke his realm's balance. If that's grim, maybe truth always sounds a bit somber. The grove grows quieter. The wind carries the faint scent of pomegranate blossoms, sweet, earthy, impossible to forget. You glance down, and in your hand, somehow, one seed gleams crimson. You don't remember picking it up, but there it is. It hums faintly, a heartbeat in miniature. Persephone's gift. You know better than to eat it, but also, you know it's not really food. It's a reminder that all journeys loop, that endings aren't exits. You press the seed to your chest, where the golden thread glows brighter, then fades into warmth. The hum of the grove softens, and you realize the line between dream and waking is thinning. The story is preparing to rest, just as you should. You lean back against the stone bench, letting your eyes drift half shut. Somewhere below, in the underworld, Hades and Persephone are beginning their next rotation, their endless, measured dance of parting and return. Above, Demeter walks the fields, smiling faintly as the first wheat bends in the breeze. And between them, somewhere in the soft hinge of the world, you breathe, neither dead nor alive, neither beginning nor end, just existing, quietly, exactly where you are. The last light of sunset brushes your face, and for the first time, you understand why they called Hades Platon, the giver of wealth. Because in the end, every treasure is borrowed from the dark. You let that thought settle as the world around you begins to blur. The sound of the wind turns into the slow rhythm of your own heartbeat. And in that space, between myth and memory, you finally start to drift. The horizon folds into itself as twilight arrives, not sudden, not sharp, but slow, like ink poured into water. You're still in the grove, half asleep on that moss-covered bench, and the air feels different now. Softer. The breeze no longer brushes past. It lingers, tracing patterns on your skin, like it's trying to memorize you before you fade. The song that's followed you since the underworld returns, quieter than before. It's Persephone again, humming somewhere between here and below. You can almost picture her, barefoot in a field of asphodels, each bloom glowing faintly under her touch. The underworld isn't cold anymore, it's calm. You tilt your head back, watching the first stars blink through the sky. They're timid at first, then confident, spilling across the heavens like scattered seeds. Funny, you think, how even the sky behaves like the earth sometimes, planting lights where darkness used to be. A mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed the stars were either fragments of divine fire or the souls of heroes who'd earned their place in the firmament. To them, constellations weren't just pretty. They were proof that the gods didn't erase, they recycled. That idea comforts you now. Maybe everything you've seen, Hades' throne, Persephone's smile, the slow ripple of Lethe, isn't lost when you wake. Maybe it just changes shape. The night deepens. You hear the faint rush of the Styx somewhere far below, echoing through the cracks of the world. Its current sounds steadier now, less like mourning, more like music. The underworld hums beneath the earth, like a heartbeat you can only hear when the rest of the world finally goes quiet. You smile faintly, remembering something Hades said. The river and the sea are one. You can see it now, the connection. The way every breath you take above stirs something below. The same air that fills your lungs also brushes against the bones of kings and poets. The same soil that grows wheat once covered heroes. You've been part of that rhythm all along. A quirky tidbit, in a few rare Greek texts, Hades was also said to be the god of wealth, not just because of buried gold, but because all things of value eventually return to him. Every gem, every harvest, every heartbeat. He wasn't hoarding. He was keeping the ledger balanced. You think of him again, not as a villain, but as a caretaker, the universe's quiet accountant, ensuring nothing is truly lost. Historians still argue whether the Greeks ever meant their myths to comfort or simply to explain. Maybe both. Maybe, like bedtime stories, they were meant to soothe children and keep adults awake enough to think. You can almost hear some ancient philosopher whispering, "It's not the fear of death that matters, it's the forgetting to live." The grove around you has grown dim. Fireflies rise lazily from the grass, blinking like bits of borrowed starlight. Each one drifts upward, following the same invisible path you once took down into the dark. You exhale, and your breath joins them, soft, pale, dissolving into the night. You look down and realize your hands are fading slightly around the edges. Not frighteningly, just naturally, like mist letting go of the morning. The story is ending, but gently, respectfully, like a friend backing out of a room to let you sleep. Somewhere far away, Persephone's laughter ripples through the air. Then another sound, Hades' low voice, steady as always. "Rest well." You murmur, "You too." Above you, the stars shimmer, and for a moment, one flickers a bit brighter than the rest. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's them. You lie back fully on the bench, the moss cool against your neck, the hum of the underworld now a lullaby deep in your bones. The line between story and self blurs completely. You're not wandering anymore. You're home, somewhere between the breath of the earth and the heartbeat of the gods. And as the last bit of light folds away, you finally let your eyes close.